After entering the small restaurant, a sharply dressed waiter welcomed Han Li. Han Li didn't head to the second floor and instead chose to sit in a remote corner of the first floor. He ordered a few dishes and silently observed everything that was occurring in the restaurant. There were people from all backgrounds sitting on the first floor, just like Han Li had seen from other restaurants. Regardless whether it be hard laborers or small business merchants, they were all present. The only thing that stood out was the table full of burly men. These 6 burly men were all effortlessly carrying a meter-long cloth bag at their sides. Han Li didn't need to use his spiritual sense to guess that they were bladed weapons. From their similar uniforms, they clearly belonged to some sort of organization. However, this greatly aroused a feeling of familiarity from Han Li as he recalled his days in the Seven Mysteries Sect. He swept his spiritual sense past the people, and he clearly heard their conversation. As expected, they were killers belonging to an organization. Han Li soon lost interest and turned his attention to examining the other patrons. At that moment, 2 young scholars walked into the restaurant. They were walking slowly and chatting with smiles on their faces. I heard that Assistant Minister Han has arrived back to the home village to pay his respects to his ancestors. Not only are grand characters of the province coming to pay an official visit, but the Fan and Li clans are also sending men over. It seems the Han clan truly wishes to have this matter be bold and grand. Exactly so. I heard that for this ancestral offering, the Han clan sent out many letters summoning their side branch clansmen regardless of the distance. Even the government officials of little repute are sending men to pay their respects. From how I see it, the Han, Fan and Li clans will soon become the 3 great families of the Jing province. It is rather inconceivable that the Han clan's abrupt rise in power took place over a span of just 100 years. What's so odd about that? Ever since a member of the Han clan managed to rank first in the imperial exams, their rise in power has been momentous. Each of their later descendants began to achieve great rankings in the imperial exams. With several generations of success, it is no wonder they are currently so impressive. Still, it would be better for us to later. The 2 scholars casually sat down at a table next to Han Li while they spoke. The Han clan. When Han Li heard them, he hastily thought to continue listening to them, but the 2 scholars quickly changed the subject and began to discuss literary works, much to Han Li's annoyance. After some thought, he suddenly stood and walked towards the scholars. "Brothers, my name is Han Li. Might I ask which Han clan you were referring to? I've arrived here after receiving an invitation to pay my respects to the clan's ancestors. However, I've grown up in a small countryside and am extremely unfamiliar with the main clan, nor do I know where to pay my respects. Could you 2 brothers give me a few directions?" The 2 scholars were stunned, but after seeing that Han Li also wore a scholar's robes and spoke with refined words, the 2 replied without any suspicions. "So it turns out that brother is a Han clan disciple. We've been quite rude. However, these is only one Han clan, the Han clan of the 3-kilometer valley." The 3-kilometer valley. This entire area was the small village where the Han clan once resided. Because the entire village only spanned 3 kilometers over the mountains, it received this unsophisticated name. It seems the Han clan they spoke of were most likely related to him somehow. With a calm expression, Han Li insipidly said, "If that's the case, then this Han clan is truly my own. Could you 2 tell me about the finer details of the clan? I've never participated in the clan's ancestor offering. I'd rather not make a fool of myself." The 2 scholars glanced at each other and then examined Han Li. Feeling that he wasn't holding any ill intentions, they agreed, "We can only give a few general details. They are known by everyone." "Many thanks," Han Li smiled. One of the scholars began to speak. "If brother is participating in the ancestral offering, it would be best for you to not immediately head to the 3-kilometer valley. Several decades ago, the Han clan changed their location to the Han clan castle. They will only return to their ancestral home in 3-kilometer valley on the day of the ancestor offering." The Han clan. Han Li's expression remained calm as he listened, but his heart stirred with excitement. 4 hours later, Han Li appeared above the verdant mountains from his past. He didn't descend, merely looking down in silence. Was this the same small village from the past? The yellow earth roads, short walls, thatched huts, and village children could no longer be seen. Instead, they were replaced with large courtyards, roofed buildings, pebbled roads, and well-clothed servants. Not a single sign of the past remained. Han Li shook his head at the sight and thought to depart when his gaze suddenly arrived at the building at the very center of the residence. This building wasn't larger than the others, but it was the only building to have more than a single story, making it rather eye-catching. The building's doors were shut, and a pitch-black signboard appeared on the outside. The words Han Clan Shrine were written on it in silver paint. A strange expression appeared on Han Li's face. After some thought, he reappeared in front of the building in a blur. Several burly shrine attendants stood in front of the shrine, but with Han Li's invisibility technique, they were incapable of spotting him. He casually swept his gaze past them and entered without further thought. Once he entered the shrine, he spotted rows of memorial tablets, numbering over several hundred. They were arranged on long tables which had empty spots on them for future generations. After sweeping his gaze over them, he found many names but none that he was familiar with. Without any further thought, he climbed to the second floor. The memorial tablets on the second floor were clearly more grand and important. Not only were there many lit incense burners, there was also a huge cauldron at the center. It was filled with scented oil and had a huge candle wick that was brightly burning. It made for a solemn sight. This time, Han Li blankly stood in place as he read the several memorial tablets at the center. Hanju, Hantai, Hantiansheng. These familiar names were all coldly written on the pitch-black memorial tablets. Han Li's heart grew heavy and he found it difficult to breathe. As the saying goes, the great Tao was emotionless. However, that was only a self-deceiving lie. Han Li may be an immortal from this land, but he was incapable of severing his emotions. He was only able to bury them deep inside his heart. Han Li eventually moved and slowly walked towards the memorial tablets at the center of the room. He stopped and expressionlessly stared at the memorial tablets as images of his close relatives began to continuously appear in his mind. An unknown amount of time slowly passed by. The heavy sound of the building's door opening woke Han Li from his reminiscent mood. However, he merely stood in place without making any moves. At that moment, the footsteps and voices of two middle-aged men could be heard. "Brother Li, you are far too impatient. Didn't I say that I would lend you the letter for reading after the shrine visit? There is need to be so anxious." This man spoke with a helpless tone. In the other person's embarrassment, they responded, "He. Esteemed Brother Han, who was it that had you mentioned that the later portion of the letter had a set of nameless martial arts left behind by your ancestor? I'm rather baffled as to why our Li clan knows nothing of this matter despite the fact that our ancestors created it. It is only natural for me to wish to see it as soon as possible. However, why is it that you enshrine the letter? It would be an absolute shame for someone to steal it." The first voice sighed and spoke with a voice of complete confidence. Who would possibly think of stealing something from a clan's ancestral hall? While our Han clan isn't necessarily a nest of dangerous characters, we still have many skilled martial artists standing guard. Ordinary people wouldn't even be able to approach it. Even if they succeeded, they would still have to fear our retaliation. "That's true," the other man agreed. As the footsteps became clear, a scholarly man and a man with thick facial hair appeared on the stairs of the second floor. The two initially arrived with a smile, but after spotting Han Li, their expressions froze. In their alarm, the large man stepped forward and covered the front of the middle-aged scholar. With a fluttering mustache and beard, he softly roared, "What a clever villain to think of waiting here in ambush, but you will not be leaving alive." Once that was said, the man's hands tightened into fists and he ferociously pounced towards Han Li. But before he arrived, a gale with astonishing pressure suppressed him. Han Li remained motionless as he stood in place with his back facing them. With a muffled thump, the large man's fist struck Han Li's back. The large man was stunned, but his face vastly changed upon seeing an azure light flicker from Han Li's body. As the man attempted to land another blow, he was sent flying. The middle-aged scholar instantly revealed an expression of amazement. Just as the large man's enormous frame fell, his body suddenly slowed and he landed on his feet as if he was light as a feather. He appeared completely uninjured. "Brother Li, are you all right? Did you sustain any internal injuries?" Although the scholarly man possessed little strength, he knew there were many ways that Jianghu martial arts could injure without any external signs. As such, he revealed worry. The large man surnamed Li took a deep breath and felt that his body had no injuries. He couldn't help but whisper in bewilderment, "It's nothing, I am fine." His skills are unfathomable, but it doesn't seem he's hostile. When the scholarly man heard this, he nodded and felt slightly more at ease. He then turned his gaze to Han Li and serenely said, "Great warrior, I am the Han clan master, Han Xianxia. Did this great warrior come here specifically for me?" The Han clan master, Han Li, slowly turned around. Ah, you. Impossible. Humph, what did your esteemed self mean by that? Before Han Li could speak, the scholar and the large man couldn't help but cry out in alarm upon seeing Han Li's appearance. The scholarly man soon thought of something, and his expression grew sullen. After the large man recovered from his alarm, he also came to a realization and wore an ill expression. You recognize me? Han Li asked with a frown. He glanced at the two and found that the two seemed faintly familiar. However, he left the matter alone with a wry smile in his heart. The scholarly man stared at Han Li and deliberately said word by word, Your esteemed self asks despite knowing the answer. Your appearance resembles that of our Han clan's fourth great-uncle. Why wouldn't I recognize you? Fourth great-uncle. When Han Li heard this, he wore a mysterious smile. Since he was the fourth eldest amongst his siblings, it was naturally referring to him. However, it was unclear how they would know of his current appearance since he hadn't met face-to-face with any of his relatives ever since he left when he was small. Han Li smiled and said, Oh, when did I say that I was like your fourth great-uncle? Couldn't this just be my natural appearance? The scholarly man quickly grew angry and he coldly said, There are many similar faces in this world, but not only does your face bear a striking resemblance, here you are in the Han clan's ancestral hall. What else does that leave for your esteemed self? Han Li's expression relaxed and he said with an impressed tone, Your reply is spot on. You are worthy of being an official of the royal court. The Han clan's current prosperity is undoubtedly a result of the later generation's efforts. A harsh expression flickered over the man's face, and he angrily said, What? Does your esteemed self truly plan on pretending to be my ancestor? Pretend? Why would I want to do that? How about you mention how you know of my appearance? I seem to recall that ever since I left home, my family had never seen my appearance. Could it be the members of the Seven Mysteries Sect drew a portrait for you? Han Li's gaze then dropped onto the large man with thick facial hair. He narrowed his eyes, eventually realizing why he found the man to be familiar. Your surname is Li. Could you be related to Li Feiyu? The large man revealed furious alarm. You. How do you know the name of my clan ancestor? It turns out you know quite a bit about my Li clan. When Han Li heard this, he nonchalantly smiled. The scholarly man was alarmed upon hearing the words Seven Mysteries Sect and Li Feiyu. He bewilderedly said, Since your esteemed self repeatedly claims that you are my ancestor's younger brother, you must certainly know that our Han clan's great-uncle has disappeared. But now, your esteemed self has shown up 200 years later, but I fail to see any indication of your great age. The scholarly man had only recently found out about the Han and Li clan's history from a letter. Could it be that this person had also seen this letter? With that thought, the scholarly man couldn't help but look at the table with the memorial tablets. The letter was hidden somewhere between them. Seeing that the scholarly man's gaze grew odd, he swept past the memorial tablets with his spiritual sense and discovered the letter hidden within. Han Li raised his hand without any reservations and beckoned towards the table. The two men were dumbstruck by what happened next. Light flashed from the table, and a yellow booklet enveloped in a mist of azure light flew out from the table towards Han Li. Han Li grabbed the booklet and the light scattered with a faint shake of his hand. He then casually flipped through it. As the scholarly man had long since been part of the bureaucracy, he was long accustomed to keeping his calm in the face of astonishing events. However, he couldn't help but dryly swallow in a panic as he glanced at the large man. The large man wasn't faring much better, but his expression grew odd as if it contained both happiness and fear. While the scholar still felt confused, the large man cupped his hands and deeply bowed towards Han Li as he hesitantly said, Might I ask if your esteemed self is an immortal cultivator of legend? As an immortal, you are unlikely to trifle with the affairs of us mortals. Would Senior happen to have any keepsakes to verify his identity? After all, this matter is rather significant. My esteemed brother Han and I cannot easily believe others based solely on words. The scholarly man was stunned upon hearing the large man, but the legend soon came to mind, and he felt his blood run cold. He began to look at Han Li with an expression of awe. Oh, I didn't expect for you to know of immortal cultivators. Impressive. From the record, it seems that you truly are Li Feiyu's descendant. Truly inconceivable for Li Feiyu's children to form a bond with my Han clan. As for regards to keepsakes, I can't recall having any. At the time, I was in complete pursuit of the Tao and departed from my homeland in a hurry. I even left without bidding goodbye to Brother Li. I merely left behind a slip of paper for him and a few bottles of medicine pills, Han Li casually said. The large man surnamed Li spoke with slight astonishment. Medicine pills were the bottles that we enshrined at our sect's shrine left behind by Senior. Han Li sighed and dimly said, "Long ago, your ancestor used essence extraction pills without any hesitation in order to excel in martial arts. Even with the medicines I left behind, I fear he wouldn't have been able to live to an old age." After a moment of hesitation, the large man carefully said, "I don't know of this matter. However, my father still lives and perhaps he might know something of the deceased ancestor. After all, these secret matters are only known by each generation's clan lord. If Senior will allow it, I will quickly send word to inquire whether or not these words are true." At that moment, he was already mostly convinced. The Li clan's establishing ancestor had met with an untimely death at an early age. Han Li waved his arm and spoke with a tone of melancholy. "There is no need. I didn't come back to make a disturbance. I merely wish to free my mind of mortal worries. Now that I see both the Han clan and the descendants of my dear friend are doing well, I am well at ease." Having heard this, the large man instead became nervous and began to wildly signal to the scholarly man with his eyes. He clearly knew what it meant to the Han and Li clans to have an immortal cultivator ancestor. The scholarly man naturally knew far better of what there was to gain or lose from this. After pondering for a moment, he respectfully said, "If your esteemed self is truly my great-uncle, I have a method of immediately verifying your identity. Our Han clan shrine contains a few possessions of our ancestors from the past. If Senior is able to identify these items, Junior will naturally be convinced of your background. Only the Han clan master from each generation is qualified to personally care for them, and they are incapable of being identified by others. Past possessions, let's take a look at them. It's only that I left home at a rather early age, so I may not be able to identify them." Han Li indifferently said. If it wasn't too troublesome, he definitely wouldn't refuse to be recognized by the descendants of the Han clan. "Please be at ease, Senior. These items were left behind as keepsakes from their times of poverty, so Senior should be able to recognize them. I will bring them now." After bowing to Han Li, the scholar descended from the second floor. After a bit of clamor from down below, the scholarly man shortly walked back up with a tray covered by red cloth. He then respectfully presented it to Han Li. Han Li took the plate and removed the red cloth, revealing the worn items before him. Han Li spoke with pleasant surprise. "Oh, so it turned out to be these items. I didn't expect to see them again in this lifetime." "Senior recognizes these items?" the scholar cautiously asked with a nervous expression. "I know a majority of these items, but there were 3 that were acquired after I left home. I don't know who they belong to. The slingshot and small bow belonged to my second elder brother Han Tai. He enjoyed playing with them when he was small. The wooden hairpin was my mother's most cherished possession. The tobacco pipe was." Han Li picked up each of these items and spoke as if he were rather familiar with them. After hearing Han Li examine half of them, the scholar felt there was no longer any doubt. Without waiting for Han Li to finish, he immediately dragged the large man forward, and they deeply saluted to Han Li. "This unfilial descendant Han Xianxia recognizes fourth great-uncle. I sincerely wish that great-uncle will forgive my unfilial actions from before." With that said, the scholar didn't dare to meet Han Li's gaze and wore an expression of embarrassment. The large man mirrored the solemn and respectful display. When the two acknowledged Han Li, he felt an indescribable feeling well up inside him. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "On the year I left the village to pursue the Tao, I didn't expect for the Han clan to become such an influential clan. It seems the saying is true. The affairs of the world are truly hard to predict. Stand up, you two. With the many years I haven't returned home, I can be considered a complete stranger to the Han clan. There is no need to be so polite." The middle-aged scholar stood up and spoke with great reverence. "Great-uncle's words are untrue. Had we unfilial descendants known that you were still alive, we would have certainly sent men to fulfill our filial duties." Han Li waved his arm and calmly said, "Filial duties, there is no need. I've come only to take a look. I won't be staying long. As a pursuer of immortality, it is better for me to have fewer ties to the mortal world." The scholar spoke with alarm. "Great-uncle, you're leaving so soon. Will you not stay a while and take a look at the other Han clan juniors in the castle?" Han Li sighed and regretfully said, "When I arrived, I flew over the Han clan castle and swept my spiritual sense past everyone inside. Unfortunately, while there are many Han clan members, none of them possess any spiritual roots. They have no fate with me. Otherwise, I wouldn't mind taking 1 or 2 clan descendants along with me on the path of cultivation." A trace of disappointment appeared on the scholar's face as he bitterly smiled. It seems despite our clan's prosperity, none have the fate to follow great uncle on the path of immortality. And Li shook his head and said, only those who possess spiritual roots may become immortal cultivators. Such a person might not even appear once among 10,000. For the several hundred Han clan members to possess no spiritual roots is to be expected. Besides, from the way I see it, it would still be better for the Li and Han clan to remain out of the cultivation world. As of current, the cultivation world is chaotic where even entire clan exterminations are possible. It would be terrible if the Han clan were to be implicated. The scholar was initially surprised and sincerely replied, this one acknowledges all fourth great uncle has said. Han Li's gaze then turned to the large man with thick facial hair. Which generation of Li Feiyu's descendants are you? What's your name? The large man hurriedly bowed his head and replied, Junior is Li Feng. I am an 11th generation descendant of Li Feiyu. I pay my respects to great uncle Han. Given the close relationship I had with Li Feiyu back then, I find it acceptable for you to call me great uncle. You were rather protective of Xianxia just now. It seems in these past years the Li clan has shown our Han clan much consideration. As the younger brother of the Han clan ancestor, I naturally won't treat you unfairly. Here are some medicine pills. They will be of great use to martial artists. They will be able to save your Li clan youth much effort in their cultivation of inner strength. Accept them for the time being. Han Li slapped his storage pouch and took 8 various colored bottles into his hands before offering them to the large man. The large man was overjoyed and hastily accepted the small bottles with repeated thanks. Although Jianghu martial artists cultivated inner strength, and it wasn't as drawn out as cultivation spiritual power, they spent much of their youth in dedication to this pursuit. With these medicine pills, a large number of experts would emerge from the Li clan. The middle-aged scholar felt happy for his good friend, but his gaze towards Han Li unconsciously revealed a slight hint of expectation as well. When Han Li saw this, he faintly smiled and calmly took a spirit beast pouch off from his waist and lightly slapped it. A short moment later, over 1,000 black-tainted gold-devouring beetles were released and formed a dazzling 3-meter-wide cloud of black, silver, and gold. It appeared almost as if specks of sunlight had appeared before them. The scholar and the large man were left completely amazed. Without any further words, he pointed to the insect swarm above him and had them concentrate into a tricolored sword. Han Li then extended his arm and had the sword fall into his hand with a buzz. This strange scene left the two at an even greater loss for words. Han Li caressed the sword while his expression wavered for a long while. Then, with a sigh, he spat an azure mist onto the sword. In a flash of azure light, a simple green scabbard appeared on the sword's blade. Han Li then horizontally held the sword in front of him with both his hands and took out a piece of fine, polished jade. Han Li gravely said, this sword is something I refined from spirit beetles. It is capable of killing others of its own accord. I will be leaving it inside the clan shrine in case the Han clan one day faces extermination. The Han clan will be able to hide inside the shrine and rely on this sword to escape calamity. However, you had best remember that this sword isn't something that I personally control. Once the sword is drawn, anybody outside of the ancestral shrine that is within a 5-kilometer radius will be killed. As such, you must treat it with the utmost caution. This is a jade pendant that holds a sliver of my essence. Without it, the sword cannot be drawn. Leave the jade pendant in the care of the Han clan's later generation clan lords. Having seen this inconceivable event occur before him, the scholar no longer held a trace of doubt towards Han Li. He hastily replied with delighted surprise, this nephew will commit great uncle's instructions to memory. Han Li smiled in response, but he didn't immediately hand over the sword and the jade pendant. Instead, he continued speaking with a solemn tone. There is something else you must remember. Because the scabbard sealing the sword is made from spiritual qi, the gold-devouring sword may only be drawn 3 times. The scabbard will thin with each use and disappear on the 3rd. Afterwards, the sword will turn back into spirit beetles and disappear. I'm sure that giving the Han clan 3 opportunities to escape calamity is a worthy gift as your ancestor's younger brother. After all, there are no fortunes in this world that last eternally. In order to prevent the sword from being used for any evil intentions or opportunistic tricks, the sword will be incapable of leaving the ancestral shrine while it is sheathed. Else, it will disappear from existence. As such, I hope you will properly use this sword to allow the Han clan to flourish for many years to come. Even if the Han clan were to later return to their status as commoners, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Once that was said, Han Li handed the sword and jade piece over to the scholar. The scholar repeatedly uttered his thanks and accepted the items with a bowed head. He carefully placed them at the center of the memorial table before returning to await further instructions from Han Li. Han Li was rather satisfied by the scholar's deferential attitude. After some thought, he took out 2 faint yellow medicine pills and handed one to both the scholar and the large man. He smiled upon seeing their surprise and said, "Those 2 items were left for the Han and Li clans. Since you 2 are also my juniors and have personally recognized me as your great-uncle, it can be considered that you have some fate with me. I will also give you 2 a few benefits as well. While these 2 bottles of medicine pills have no effect on me, they will extend the lifespan of mortals who take them and strengthen their bodies. When you 2 take them, you will both live to at least 100 years. Many thanks forth, great uncle. Many thanks, great Uncle Han." When the scholar and the large man heard this, they accepted the small bottles with repeated thanks. They both appeared pleased beyond expectation. Han Li nodded his head and took another look around. Then, with a curious expression, he asked, "From how you 2 recognized me, it seems there should be a portrait of me left behind. If it is in the ancestral shrine, could you let me take a look at it and tell me who drew it?" The scholar immediately replied, "The portrait is actually on this floor. Please wait a moment." He walked up to what seemed to be a common wall and gave it a push. With a creak and a thud, a portion of the wall flipped over to reveal 6 suspended silk portraits. Han Li stepped forward and examined the portraits with complete stillness. He saw the image of a smiling 17-year-old youth. It was a portrait of Han Li from long ago. The middle-aged scholar stood behind Han Li and gave an explanation with a soft voice. It was said that this portrait was given to our Han clan by the deceased Li clan ancestor. However, no one knows of its creator. As if he hadn't heard, Han Li's gaze shifted several times and it fell onto a portrait of Han Li's father wearing noble clothing. Although he appeared far more aged than when Han Li left the village, he appeared completely happy. A trace of sadness appeared on Han Li's face. He then swept his gaze past each of the other portraits. The other portraits were all of white-haired old men. It took him quite some effort before he could match their appearances with his brothers as he remembered them. He felt a flood of emotion storm within his heart as he stood in place. The scholar and the large man both tactfully kept silent. Some time later, Han Li began to mutter to himself in a whisper. The 2 wished to hear what he had to say, but the 2 were blinded by a sudden surge of azure light. By the time they refocused their gaze, Han Li could no longer be seen, but his voice echoed in their ears. "Although I am a rather capable immortal on this continent, I also have many ferocious enemies. Do not speak of today's matters with anyone else. So long as this matter does not spread, and you do not allow the gold-devouring spirit sword to be seen by outsiders, those from the immortal world will pay you no notice and will not bother you. I will now absorb myself in the pursuit of the great Tao and immortality, so I won't be involved with the affairs of the Han clan. Take care of yourselves." Once that was said, Han Li's voice came to an abrupt end, leaving behind what seemed to be echoes. The scholar and the large man were left staring at each other in dismay. By the time the last word was spoken, Han Li was already 10 kilometers away from the 3-kilometer valley while flying across the sky in a streak of azure light. Although he had something of a relationship with the Han clan members, he had always viewed his true family to be his parents and siblings. Although the scholar and the large man had treated him with great respect, Han Li felt no real intimacy towards them. After all, the distance of many generations and the vast changes to Green Ox Village and the 3-kilometer valley caused Han Li to strongly feel as if he were an outsider. However, this trip to his hometown had weakened the last worries he held in his heart. He was sure that with the passage of time, these worries would truly disappear, and his distant ties with these descendants would truly fade away. As such, Han Li quickly gained his bearings and set off. Several days later, Han Li passed through the Land Province, specifically making a detour at Jiayuan City. Little had changed about the city apart from its inhabitants. Not only did Sun Ergu and the 4th-level gang disappear, but even the Rainbow Sect had disappeared over 100 years prior. It had been replaced with a newly emerged gang by the name of the United Heavens Union. If he remembered correctly, the Rainbow Sect had had the backing of Spirit Beast Mountain in the past, but at the climax of the war with the Devil Tao, Spirit Beast Mountain defected to the controlling Spirit Sect. Now that the state of UA was under the control of the Ghost Spirit Sect, the fall of the Rainbow Sect came as no surprise. Additionally, he had no idea if Mo Yuju or her daughter had met with any mishaps. It was a pity that so many years had passed, as even if Han Li asked around, there would be no information to be found. Han Li could only sigh and hurriedly depart. As for Sun Ergu, he didn't manage to find any information on his clan. Han Li didn't mind this in particular since he didn't hold them in much regard. Although he had given Sun Ergu many benefits, Han Li had received little in return. As such, Han Li left the city of Jia Yuan and thought to fly in the direction of the state of Yuanwu. Once he passed through the state of Yuanwu, he planned on returning to the Drifting Cloud sect. But half a day after he departed Jia Yuan City, his expression froze and he stopped in mid-air. He turned his head and gazed into the distance. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes. At that moment, a party of cultivators suddenly stopped 100 kilometers away. The two white-clothed women hesitantly glanced at each other as their expressions grew heavy. The old man standing behind them nervously asked, "Martial Ants, did something happen?" "Yes, I just felt the spirit nascent's position suddenly stop. I don't know whether or not we've been discovered." The sharp-eyed, white-clothed woman surnamed Liu no longer wore her normal lazy expression, which had been replaced with an incisive air. The burly man spoke with an odd expression. "That's impossible. Even a nascent soul cultivator cannot sense something at this distance. Could it be that Martial Ant's secret technique disturbed the spirit nascent and alerted him?" The woman surnamed Liu shook her head and firmly said, "That can't be. Our technique was something that was passed down by your martial ancestor. It only allows for the one-sided detection of the wood spirit nascent. So long as the other party hasn't yet reached late nascent soul stage, he shouldn't be able to perceive anything strange. After all, it would be considered fearsome for nascent soul cultivators to see within even a 50-kilometer radius, even if their spiritual sense was exceptionally powerful. Could it be that we are chasing after a late nascent soul eccentric?" The green-clothed woman amongst the 4 Foundation establishment cultivators seemed to have thought of something and worriedly said, "But Martial Ant Liu, why is it?" Suddenly, Han Yunjai broke her silence as she was tracing the spirit nascent's location and spoke with an alarmed expression. "Not good. The spirit nascent's position is moving towards us." "What? It's coming over in our direction. Has that cultivator truly discovered us?" The woman surnamed Liu turned pale and she hastily clutched her hands in an incantation gesture. After a short moment, the woman grimaced and spoke with certainty. "The cultivator who restricted the spirit nascent is indeed moving towards us at an extraordinary speed. He is certain to be a nascent soul cultivator." After muttering to herself for a moment, Han Yunjie slowly said, "Quickly run. Fighting means certain death. I recall that a branch of the Ghost Spirit Sect is located in the nearby land province. Let's flee there. Although we do not get along well, we are still on the same side. We will draw on the support of their spell formations to fight this unknown nascent soul cultivator." Besides, the nascent soul cultivator might not necessarily dare to brazenly attack the Ghost Spirit Sect branch. It will greatly increase our chance of escaping. "Martial Ant Han speaks true. Let us quickly go, or else it will be too late." When the large man heard that a nascent soul cultivator was about to arrive, he felt his mouth turn dry in alarm. The woman surnamed Liu raised her eyebrows and coldly glanced at the large man, Humph, panicking and spouting unnecessary words. "We will use the spirit joining arts to combine our magic power into one. This way, we will increase our speed by nearly half. Let us hurry." The large man felt his heart drop, and he didn't dare to say any more. Under the lead of Han Yunjai and cultivator Liu, the 6 immediately made use of the spirit joining arts and flew off on their magic treasures and tools as a single streak of yellow light. With their united spiritual chi, their speed was amazingly fast. At that moment, Han Li immediately noticed this, and his expression grew sullen as he flew forward at full speed. Han Li didn't entirely understand just how powerful his spiritual sense currently was. He merely knew that by utilizing the 4th layer of the Great Development Technique, his spiritual sense was able to envelop a 50-kilometer radius around himself. Past that, he wouldn't be able to observe anything in detail. He would only have a vague observation of anything within 150 kilometers. A moment ago, Han Li suddenly felt a sliver of strange, concealed spiritual power linger near his body that had greatly alarmed him. Ordinary nascent soul cultivators wouldn't have been able to easily detect it with their spiritual sense. Although he didn't know exactly what this was, Han Li knew that trouble had arrived at his door. He guessed that it was more so the matter that he had casually tidied up with the Ghost Spirit Sect rather than his extermination of the Fu clan back in the state of Yuanwu. As a result of this discovery, Han Li spread out his spiritual sense and discovered that 100 kilometers behind him there was a party of several cultivators that were stealthily following him. Although it was too far away for him to clearly see their faces, Han Li surged with killing intent and flew towards their direction without any hesitation. As cultivators that were capable of tracking him, he absolutely couldn't allow them to continue following him. Eradicating them would prevent future troubles, and since there were only 2 core formation cultivators in their party, it should prove to be an easy affair. In the following instant, a dazzling 30-meter-long streak of azure light quickly chased after a dense beam of yellow light, producing waves of clear rings from their wake. In only a short moment, Han Li had already closed the gap by 50 kilometers. When cultivator Liu sporadically detected Han Li's position through her techniques, she couldn't help but grow pale in terror. At this speed, the 6 wouldn't even reach half the distance to the Ghost Spirit Sect branch, before being chased down by the nascent soul cultivator. With great worry, the woman turned her head to Han Yunjai and thought to discuss further plans to flee when Han Yunjai suddenly smiled and whispered, "Quickly, look ahead. There is a party of Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators that seem to be heading towards us." Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators. Han Yunjai's soft voice roused the spirits of not only cultivator Liu, but the other 4 Foundation establishment cultivators as well. Although they didn't dare to imagine that they would have enough strength to fight a nascent soul cultivator, they would be able to assist them in buying more time. As expected, they soon saw over 10 black dots approach them from the distance. Cultivator Liu felt somewhat at ease when she saw them. Nevertheless, she snuck a glance at Han Yunjai, shaken that her senior martial sister Liu had discovered the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators far earlier than she had. Since there was only one wood spirit nascent, they were actually rivals despite their appearance as martial sisters. While they would ordinarily call each other martial sisters with great familiarity, they felt a great competitive spirit in their hearts, hoping for the opportunity to fuse with the wood spirit nascent. It was only natural to covet an opportunity to reach for greater heights. At that moment, the 6 had arrived before the party of Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators and scattered the spiritual chi around them to reveal their true appearances. The Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators had long discovered the controlling Spirit Sect cultivators. Although they didn't take any malicious actions, they each assumed a cautious attitude. "Yi, isn't it junior martial sisters Han and Liu from the controlling Spirit Sect? A truly rare visit indeed for you to have arrived at the state of Yue." A surprised voice spoke out from among the black-clothed Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators. 3 core formation cultivators then walked out from the group, 2 men and 1 woman. These 3 Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators consisted of a black-clothed man with a resolute appearance, an embroidered-robed scholar with flickering eyes, and a middle-aged woman who still retained the beauty of her youth. When the woman surnamed Liu saw the 3 disciples of Master Splintered Soul, she sweetly smiled, "Senior Martial Brother Zun, so it turned out to be the disciples of Senior Splintered Soul. How timely." But when the 3 black-robed cultivators heard this, they coldly examined them and their expressions grew sullen. The woman amongst the 3 wore an unfriendly expression and asked, "Timely, why have our 2 junior martial sisters from the controlling Spirit Sect snuck into our state of Yue? Could it be you hold our Ghost Spirit Sect in contempt?" Cultivator Liu explained with a smile, "Senior martial sister misunderstands. Senior martial sister Han and I came to the state of Yue under orders from our sect ancestor. Because the matter was urgent and couldn't be delayed, we were unable to inform your esteemed sect of the matter. Moreover, we've only arrived in the state of Yue for a few days. We had no intentions of neglecting your sect." The black-clothed cultivator stared at cultivator Liu and expressionlessly asked, "Regardless of why you've arrived at the state of Yue, there is only one question we wish to ask you. Did you take anything from the Tai Yue Mountains a few days ago?" Han Yunjie frowned and an odd expression appeared on her face. The Tai Yue Mountains, the mountain range that originally belonged to Yellow Maple Valley. "Hm, did you 2 junior martial sisters truly pass by there?" Although the black-robed cultivator's expression remained calm, a cold glint appeared within his eyes. The embroidered-robed scholar and the woman's expressions tensed, their faces revealing traces of hostility. When Han Yunjie and cultivator Liu saw this, they unconsciously exchanged glances. The 2 weren't fools. It was clear the other party revealed hostility. However, the party of controlling Spirit Sect cultivators truly hadn't entered the Tai Yue Mountains. They merely probed the Spirit Nascent's position from a distance and discovered that the cultivator who captured it seemed to have stayed at the Tai Yue Mountains for half a day. Cultivator Liu's gaze flickered for a moment and she probingly said, "We hadn't crossed through the Tai Yue Mountains. However, the cultivator that is 50 kilometers behind us had crossed through the Tai Yue Mountains. It did seem that person was there during that time. Could Senior Marshal Brother Zun be looking for him?" The embroidered-robed scholar boldly stared at the two women and suddenly smiled. 50 kilometers behind you. Are you making this up? How did you know that person stayed at the Tai Yue Mountains? Could he be a cultivator of your sect? Cultivator Liu blushed and spoke with luminous eyes. Senior Marshal Brother Que must be joking. How could we dare to so brazenly lie to our senior martial disciples while we are in the state of Yue? If you don't believe me, then this junior martial sister will make a heavenly pledge to answer your questions. You should now know my answers to be true. We don't know this person. As for how we know of the matter with the Tai Yue Mountains, it's a bit complicated. Since this little sister has urgent matters to attend to, I would rather give you senior martial brothers a more thorough explanation on another day. As she spoke, she revealed a flirtatious charm that seemed to stun the scholar. The black-clothed cultivator frowned after seeing her expression and grew doubtful. After muttering to himself for a moment, his expression relaxed and he calmly said, "Were this an ordinary matter, I would believe you without doubt. However, our sixth junior martial brother and his disciples were exterminated in the Tai Yue Mountains, and not even a speck of dust remained. My master was enraged by this and assigned us to investigate any high-grade cultivators that had recently entered the state of Yue. Since the movements of Junior Martial Sisters' party are rather strange, would it not be better for us to confront this cultivator together? I wish to hear this cultivator's story. If he is truly the killer of our sixth junior martial brother, we will greatly thank you too." The black-clothed cultivator then rigidly stared at the party of controlling spirit sect cultivators. Confront, Cultivator Liu's expression grew unsightly. "What? Are you two junior martial sisters too busy to help us?" The black-clothed cultivator seemed to speak lightly of the matter, but the group of ghost spirit sect cultivators behind them all formed a semicircle blocking their front. It appeared that if the controlling spirit sect cultivators didn't agree, they would be attacked. Upon seeing this, Cultivator Liu's expression changed and she thought to say something, but suddenly she turned her head around with fright. It wasn't just this woman, but all the cultivators present felt an icy spiritual sense suddenly sweep over them, enveloping them all within it. Although the spiritual sense's owner wasn't yet seen, they unmistakably felt a harsh, bone-chilling intent. In furious alarm, the middle-aged woman couldn't help but shout, "A nascent soul cultivator! The person you spoke of was actually a nascent soul cultivator. You wanted to lead us to our deaths. Cut the rubbish. Immediately flee. Everyone escape if you can." Although the black-robed man surnamed Zun was also furious, he knew that now was not the time to pursue the matter. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately flew off as a streak of black light. In the embroidered-robed scholar's alarm, he hesitantly said, "That person isn't necessarily the killer of sixth junior martial brother. There is no need to fear him." The woman snorted and coldly said, "If senior martial brother wishes to leave his life at the mercy of others, then please forgive your junior martial sister for not joining you." She then tore through the skies as a streak of red light. The scholar's expression grew extremely unsightly, and he regretfully glanced in the direction of his fellow Ghost Spirit Sect members before flying after the other two. When the Ghost Spirit Sect Foundation establishment cultivators saw this, they scattered, fleeing for their own lives. They were fundamentally incapable of withstanding the fearsomeness of a nascent soul cultivator. With a raised brow, Cultivator Liu furiously whispered, "Those people were truly useless. Not only did they not help us, but they also wasted time for us to flee. No, it is far better now. There are more people to give us cover, greatly increasing our own chances of escape. May each of our fates be safe." Han Yunjai revealed an extraordinarily calm expression and patted the storage pouch at her waist, summoning a large snow-white bird in the air. Cultivator Liu and the other controlling spirit sect cultivators also moved quickly. They each fled using either their magic tools or their own spirit beasts, but regardless of whatever method they used to escape, no one ran in the same direction as another. In their fear, they hoped to use their numbers to avert the gaze of death from behind them. According to their thoughts, the nascent soul cultivator wouldn't be able to pick them all off one by one, fast though they may be. As such, the many cultivators fled as quickly as they could. Having arrived 50 kilometers away, Han Li was amazed to discover that yet another wave of Devil Dao cultivators had appeared. But when he saw them scatter, he couldn't help but frown. He felt the matter had become far more troublesome. A harsh expression appeared on his face, and he took a deep breath. Silver lightning arced from his back, followed by roars of thunder as two silver wings emerged from his back. After infusing a sliver of divine devil-bane lightning into the thunderstorm wings, Han Li instantly disappeared in an arc of lightning. A moment later, he reappeared several kilometers away. Traveling great distances in a mere flicker of lightning, Han Li shortly appeared at the area where the cultivators had recently scattered. Han Li expressionlessly used his spiritual sense to immediately find the Devil Dao cultivators that fled. At that moment, he discovered that the farthest to flee was already over 20 kilometers away. The closest was only 5 kilometers away. Han Li sneered and immediately set his target on the farthest core formation cultivator and disappeared in a flash of light. The cultivator farthest away wasn't the one who fled first, the black-robed man surnamed Zun. Rather, it was the middle-aged woman instead. Her body pulsed with red light as she tore through the sky as a huge fireball, much like one would imagine of a demon spirit. This strange technique allowed her to travel the fastest amongst her peers, despite being only an early core formation cultivator. There were several varied-length ribbons of light directly extending from her body. With each twinkle of azure light from a ribbon, the woman was propelled 100 meters forward, resulting in an astonishing speed. The woman was basking in the pride of her rarely seen wind-fire movement technique that she reckoned to be on par with others, top-grade techniques. Combined with the wind attribute treasure she cultivated, the floating spirit ribbon, her speed was increased even further. She believed her current speed to match even early nascent soul cultivators. If one were to speak of the cultivator that was most likely to make it out safely, it would be her. As the woman thought to herself, she suddenly heard rumbling nearby. Although the sound wasn't loud, she couldn't help but turn her head around in alarm. When the woman turned her head around, she couldn't spot even the slightest trace of a person, but the deep rumbles only became louder as if something was on the verge of approaching her. Her face instantly paled and she wildly looked around in terror. In that moment, something suddenly came to mind, and she flew off with even greater speed than before. Just a second later, silver light flashed from the empty space, only to soon fade away. When the silver light flashed once more, it reappeared over 300 meters away. Han Li's winged silhouette could be faintly made out from within the light. Han Li glanced at the woman within the red light flying and felt a trace of surprise at her amazing speed. The woman's fearsome movement technique was actually comparable to his own thunderstorm wings lightning movement. It seemed that there were truly an unfathomable number of techniques within the world. Han Li felt a trace of sorrow from his heart before spreading out the wings behind him. With a single fan, Han Li turned into a bolt of lightning and appeared at the woman's front. He then calmly raised his hand and spread out his fingers, shooting a streak of azure swordlight from each of his fingertips. With an expression pale from fright, the woman loudly yelled, "Senior, please spare me." Soon after, the red light surrounding her body shined brilliantly, combining with her several azure light ribbons to form a dense light barrier around her. Han Li slightly frowned and glanced at the woman in silence. The 5 streaks of swordlight then condensed into a thread and began to strike the light barrier. Several muffled bangs sounded out. This firewind attribute barrier was truly powerful to be able to repeatedly block the attacks of the first 3 strands of sword chi. But when the 4th strand of sword chi struck, the barrier was shattered to the woman's despair. 2 streaks of sword chi then struck her vitals before she could react. Han Li glanced at the woman's falling body and shook his head. With a flick of his finger, a fireball shot out, turning the woman's corpse into ash, and he summoned the woman's light ribbons and storage pouch into his hand. "If I didn't kill you, those Devil Dao nascent soul cultivators would pursue me." Han Li sighed, and his body flickered with lightning once more while his spiritual sense locked onto another fleeing figure. The next target was the black-robed cultivator who held the deepest cultivation. He was at the peak of the mid-core formation stage, and was just a step away from entering late-core formation stage. As Han Li flew in that direction, he patted his spirit beast pouch and released large quantities of black-tainted gold-devouring beetles. Under the orders of his spiritual sense, the beetles immediately condensed into over 10 tricolored blades for chasing down each of the fleeing Foundation establishment cultivators. This lot had meager cultivation and speed, so Han Li was disinclined to personally slay each of them and merely used his beetles to take care of them in one fell sweep. He would only personally deal with the core formation cultivators. After all, these core formation cultivators were extremely fast. The beetles would have no chance of pursuing them. Gold-devouring beetles were adept at closing short distance, but stood little chance in a long-distance chase. The black-clothed cultivator was standing underneath on a shining dagger, while hurrying on his way with a sullen expression. He didn't expect to come across a nascent soul cultivator when he went looking for the murderer of his sixth junior martial brother. While he didn't know whether or not this cultivator had anything to do with the death of his sixth junior martial brother, he did know that the controlling spirit sect cultivators had something to do with him. It appeared that this nascent soul cultivator was chasing after the controlling spirit sect disciples. It was likely that they had provoked him in some way, drawing their ghost spirit sect into the crossfire. Even if the nascent soul cultivator didn't hold any ill intent toward them, it was likely that they would be killed in order to be silenced. Regardless, there was now a nascent soul cultivator involved in the investigation of his sixth junior martial brother's death, meaning it was no longer something he could deal with. After he returned, he would make a report to his master and have him deal with the matter. Since this cultivator dared to pursue Devil Dalcor formation cultivators such as themselves, this nascent soul eccentric shouldn't be affiliated with any faction. He must have been a vagrant cultivator, else he would have shown consideration to the vast powers of the Devil Dao. As the black-clothed cultivator worriedly pondered, he suddenly heard a series of strange rumbles from his side. They were intermittent and faded away as quickly as they appeared. Alarmed, the black-clothed cultivator hastily turned his head around, only to see a flash of azure light before all went dark. Hanli expressionlessly waved his hand and retrieved the giant azure sword from the corpse. Although this person had cautiously flew with a light barrier surrounding him, it was as powerless as thin paper against the strike of his combined bamboo cloudswarm swords. Both man and light barrier were cut through in a single blow. Hanli's gaze now turned to yet another distant location. While being pulled forward by two dark green skulls, a scholarly cultivator wearing embroidered robes was nervously glancing at his surroundings. Despite having fled so far away, he clearly understood that so long as the nascent soul cultivator's spiritual sense enveloped him, it was only a matter of time before they would pursue him. As a result, he simultaneously spread out his spiritual sense to its greatest extent while he flew forward as fast as he could. He could feel his thumping heart rise into his throat. When a sudden sense of unease gripped him, he turned his head around and felt his heart drop into a deep abyss. Not far away, a youth in his 20s had appeared at an unknown time. He wore azure scholar robes and smiled towards him, revealing glints of his perfect teeth. But before the embroidered-robed cultivator could turn his head back and run, the youth said with a friendly tone, "It must have been quite taxing for fellow Taoists to have run so far. It's only proper for me to send you on your way." When Hanli said this, he flung his sleeve and scattered countless gold specks across the sky. These specks instantly formed a huge golden cloud and enveloped the sky with a fearsome presence. The embroidered-robed cultivator released a wretched scream and was engulfed by the golden cloud alongside his magic treasure. A moment later, the golden cloud scattered, leaving no trace of the cultivator behind. Hanli's expression changed upon seeing this and he muttered, "The evolved gold-devouring beetles are far more fearsome. In a mere instant, they were able to even clearly devour magic treasures. Their repute of being able to devour anything is well deserved." Soon after he flung a spirit beast pouch from his sleeve, and the gold-devouring beetles reluctantly flew into the bag after spiraling through the air several times. Hanli frowned at the sight and inwardly sighed. With their vast increase in strength, the beetles could no longer be as smoothly controlled as before, resulting in a trace of helplessness dampening his previously high spirits. Leaving another wave of thunder in his wake, Hanli disappeared yet again in a flash of silver light. Xianxia was mounted atop a pure white spirit bird that was hurriedly rushing through the sky as a 15-meter-long streak of white light. At that moment, both bird and rider were enveloped in a soft light. When combined with the woman's flawless appearance, she appeared all the more otherworldly. However, her brow was currently furrowed, and she held a palm-sized jade disc in her hand. She was carefully examining it with a fluctuating expression. The polished jade disc pulsed with an astonishing emerald chi and was deeply engraved with many decorative designs. It also glowed with lines of ancient, silver-gold talisman characters. One could tell that it was an unordinary treasure from a single glance. The center of the jade disc was as sleek as a mirror, and there were 6 specks of red light that were intermittently flickering from within it as if they were fireflies. At that moment, a speck of light brightened and suddenly disappeared from sight. When Xianxia saw this, She pursed her lips in concern and attentively stared at the disc in her hand. However, after a short moment, two more lights brightly flashed and disappeared from sight. Han Yunjai's calm demeanor suddenly changed. When yet another red speck of light disappeared, there were now only two specks that still remained on the jade disc. Han Yunjai gently brushed away a strand of her hair from her face and bitterly smiled, muttering in an inaudible voice, "Apart from junior marital sister Liu and I, there are no other survivors. The 4 Foundation establishment disciples have already died. Could it be that this person is capable of doppelganger techniques or possesses some other inconceivable technique? It seems we've underestimated what a nascent soul cultivator is capable of. I reckon those ghost spirit sect cultivators aren't any better off. Had I known of this earlier, it would have been better for us to travel together and stake it all together." Although Han Yunjai felt slight regret at her previous decision, she knew there was nothing she could do about it now. She could only put away the jade disc with a sigh. She then spat out a translucent, glowing pearl. The pearl revolved once around her and then fell onto the large bird's head, rigidly staying in position without any movement. The woman clutched her hands in an incantation gesture and pointed to the pearl with a solemn expression. As the pearl released a blinding radiance, the bird raised its head and cawed. With a shake of its wings, the giant white bird left a trail of white light in its wake, shooting forward with even greater speed. Han Yunjai didn't cease using the technique, and her complexion paled as a result. It was obvious this secret technique sapped much of her vitality, but given how dire the current circumstances were, she had no choice but to make use of it. Not long after she made use of this secret technique, she suddenly heard rumbles of thunder. Alarm appeared on her face, knowing that the nascent soul cultivator had finally caught up to her. She had already reached the greatest speed she could muster. There was nothing else she could do apart from hastily covering herself in a barrier. In order to easily enter core formation, she had previously cultivated a cultivation technique lacking any powerful abilities. With 2 further claps of thunder, an arc of silver lightning flashed at the woman's side. A winged silhouette appeared about 40 meters ahead of her, while an azure light obscured the man's face. The man wordlessly raised his arm, summoning several streaks of blinding azure light. Han Yunjai revealed an expression of despair and closed her eyes in the face of certain death. "Yi, it's you." When the silhouette clearly saw Han Yunjai's appearance, he shouted out in surprise. The light from his arm dimmed in an instant. Han Yunjai was baffled by this. When she thought to examine the other party's appearance, his figure flickered with silver light and disappeared. Han Yunjai was at a loss for a moment, but when she heard thunder roar from behind her, she regained clarity of mind. Just as the woman thought to hastily turn around, her light barrier was shattered, followed by the strike of a sliver of golden lightning. Han Yunjai suddenly felt herself turn numb and her limp body fell off the bird. At that same moment, she felt as if she were being carried in a man's embrace. With shameful fury stirring inside her, she fell unconscious. Han Li glanced at the woman in his bosom, and Riley smiled with a trace of helplessness. After an unknown amount of time passed, Han Yunjai slowly opened her eyes to a blue, cloudless sky. She then glanced around in alarm and hurriedly stood up, discovering that she was currently at some small mountain. Her large white bird was crouching nearby, as if it had lost consciousness. Han Yunjai hastily walked over to take a look at it. Fortunately, the bird was merely affected by a simple restriction that was easy to dispel. The woman then awakened the bird with a breath of relief and flew it into the air, intending to observe her surroundings. She didn't seem to be far from where she had lost consciousness, and it appeared that not much time had passed either. Han Yunjai appeared to be at a loss for a long while, before suddenly recalling a dreadful matter. She hastily examined her clothes and body. They appeared ordinary, as if nothing strange had occurred. Additionally, the magic treasures within her body and her storage pouch were untouched. This truly dumbfounded Han Yunjai. Not only was she not killed, but she wasn't assaulted either. She was completely lost as to what was going on. Han Yunjai recalled that before she fainted, the nascent soul cultivator yelled in shock, revealing an expression of bewilderment. Could it be that nascent soul cultivator had recognized her? Were they friends? However, she couldn't recall ever having met any nascent soul cultivators from another sect. Unfortunately, this person moved far too quickly, and she wasn't able to see his appearance while his stature appeared rather ordinary. However, she wasn't able to make out anything from his cry of alarm. Han Yunjai pondered for a while, but she was unable to come up with any answers. She soon took out the jade disc from her robes and formed an incantation gesture with a single hand. After muttering a few words, A streak of white light struck the jade disc, and a flicker of green light revealed that only single speck of red light remained. And Yunjai tensely frowned at the sight. She began to feel trepidation when she recalled how she had been effortlessly restrained by the nascent soul cultivator. Her junior martial sister Liu was either killed or left the range of her magic treasure. From the nascent soul cultivator's previous killing spree, it seemed likely to be the former. She faintly sighed and put away her magic treasure before flying away on her bird. At that same moment in a faraway place, Han Li was flying through the air as he held a young woman in his arms. He looked down at the intact woman in his arms with an entirely calm expression. Not long after he knocked Han Yunjai unconscious, he immediately changed direction and chased down the other controlling spirit sect cultivator. When this woman saw Han Li chasing after her, she wore an expression of despair and threw several foot-long winged centipedes into the air. This centipede was quite unordinary. Its body glowed with a pitch-black light and had two snow-white wings on its back. As soon as they left the spirit beast pouch, they spouted out large breaths of frost, resulting in a fierce appearance. Han Li was initially stunned upon seeing them, but he soon grew elated. If he wasn't mistaken, these exotic insects were the 18th-rank winged frost centipedes. These centipedes were the same as his gold-devouring beetles. They were also an insect species that existed during times of antiquity. Due to their partial lineage from frost-attribute dragons, their bodies became snow-white upon full maturation, grew 6 wings, and could spew enough icy chi to freeze anything within 50 kilometers. However, these centipedes were exactly the same as his original gold-devouring beetles. They were still only fledglings. The icy chi they spouted might prove difficult to common cultivators, but to Han Li, who previously refined a trace of celestial ice flames, it was nothing to fear. Han Li immediately began to circulate his cultivation. He easily swept up the icy chi with his sleeve and brought it towards his body without the slightest hesitation, much to cultivator Liu's shock. He took advantage of this opportunity to restrain the woman through the use of lightning movement and knocked her unconscious. With the absence of spiritual sense command, the winged centipedes flew back into their spirit beast pouches. Han Li glanced at the beautiful woman in his grasp and wore a trace of hesitation. Killing the woman would only take a very slight effort, but in that case, he'd be incapable of acquiring the 6-winged frost centipedes. Ordinarily, users of spirit beasts and insects placed down self-detonative restrictions to safeguard against having their animals falling into the hands of their killers. Once their master met an unexpected death and their soul scattered, the spirit beast would follow suit and self-destruct. Naturally, if cultivators felt that their lifespan was drawing close to the end and wished to impart these animals onto their successors, they would get rid of these restrictions. Han Li's gold-devouring beetles, for example, were also placed under similar restrictions. Since Han Li wished to acquire these centipede eggs, he couldn't kill the woman. He was also interested in the controlling spirit sect's method of controlling insects. After all, the controlling spirit sect was renowned in the entire heavenly south for its beast and insect use. They were certain to have great experience in controlling insects, and were certain to possess a secret technique capable of better controlling his gold-devouring beetles. With that thought, Han Li placed several talismans on her body to restrict her spiritual power and prevent her from waking up. He then carried the woman off in a streak of azure light across the sky. As for Han Yunjai, when he recalled that young girl that he met in his youth, he couldn't bring himself to strike her down. In the end, he wasn't a heartless man by nature and could only leave the woman alone. In any case, Han Yunjai hadn't seen his true face and would have little to report once she returned. And by the time he headed back to the state of Zai, even if these matters were all revealed, what could the controlling spirit sect and the ghost spirit sect do to him then? The Heavenly Tao Alliance and the Devil Tao were already hostile with each other. With the Heavenly Fiend sect master personally attacking the Dreamcloud Mountains sacred area, there were surely grievances being nursed by the 3 sects of Dreamcloud Mountains. So long as they were incapable of trapping the other, all the 2 powers would be able to do was menacingly glance at each other and speak boldly. These circumstances were fully known to Han Li, but for the time being it would be best for him to hurry on his way to avoid being surrounded by other nascent soul cultivators. With that thought, Han Li unconsciously increased his speed. When the several ghost spirit sect cultivators met their end, an isolated room in the old base of the masked moon sect opened to reveal a black-robed cultivator leaving seclusion. When his many capable disciples simultaneously met a bitter end, the nascent soul eccentric was unable to continue seclusion in feigned ignorance. He wordlessly released several message talismans, delivering the news of his disciples' tragic end to several Ghost Spirit Sect branches across the state of UA. He was about to personally set off and discover who it was that was so bold as to have killed Splintered Soul's disciple. However, his actions were too little too late. Before the Ghost Spirit Sect and Devil Dao cultivators even started their large-scale search, Han Li had already left the state of UA and began to head north in the direction of the state of Yuan Wu. Daoist Splintered Soul ultimately gained nothing. He merely had a rough impression that his disciples had been killed by an unknown nascent soul cultivator that had already left the country. As a result, he could do nothing despite his raging fury. 10 days later, Han Yunjai returned to the Grand Spirit Mountains in the state of Tianluo, where she kowtowed in front of a pitch-black stone room. She had personally delivered a rough explanation of what had happened and had presented herself before the old man, begging for forgiveness. You were detected over 100 kilometers away, and you were the only survivor amongst our sect and the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators as well. The old man's words were asked with an odd tone. That is right, Marshal Sr. I and Junior Marshal Sister Liu each fled for our lives, but I was the only one who managed to escape. The others' whereabouts are unclear, but it is likely that they were also killed. For some unknown reason, Han Yunjai decided to conceal the fact that this unknown nascent soul cultivator had recognized her. She merely mentioned her escape vaguely. Since this person was able to confine the spirit nascent, this person is most likely a nascent soul cultivator. But to be able to sense your movements past 50 kilometers is a fearsome feat indeed. According to what I know, there are but a few late nascent soul cultivators in the entirety of the heavenly south. Could it be this person is one of those undying bastards? The old man's voice grew sullen and contained a trace of deep dread. This is something that is unknown to Marshal Nice. Because of this person's immensely powerful spiritual sense, I didn't dare to closely pursue him. I merely felt him leave the state of UA from far away. He headed north through the state of Yuan Wu, towards the direction of the righteous Dao and the heavenly Dao alliance. As such, Marshal Nice didn't dare to follow him. In the end, I was unable to identify who it was and could only return to the sect. Please forgive me, Marshal Sr. You aren't at fault. What is there to forgive? If this person was truly a late nascent soul cultivator, the result would be the same even if I personally went. It must have been hard to survive. Because I didn't give it enough thought, I sent you and Liu Yu to track down the other party because of your secret sensing techniques. I didn't think of the possibility that you'd encounter a late nascent soul cultivator. As of current, we are incapable of detecting the spirit nascent's location, as wondrous as your secret technique may be. For the time being, just take some rest. Additionally, it seems Junior Marshal Brother Han has left seclusion. Why don't you pay him a visit? Many thanks for Marshal Senior's understanding. Marshal Nice will be taking her leave. With a curtsy and an inward sigh of relief, she respectfully departed. When Han Yunjai was no longer in sight, silence filled the room. A moment later, the old man turned to an empty corner of the room. Do you believe your Junior Marshal sister to be telling the truth? If a late nascent soul stage cultivator truly appeared, there was no way that girl would have been able to escape by a fluke. The old man's voice became void of emotion as if he were someone entirely different. A flash of light appeared from the corner as soon as the old man finished talking. A middle-aged man with thick eyebrows and large eyes respectfully answered, Marshal Senior, I used a secret technique to sense Junior Marshal Sister Han's mood. It was calm for the most part. It was merely when she mentioned her escape that her heart was in turmoil. I reckon she was concealing something that had to do with her escape. The old man released a long sigh and snorted. He gloomily said, I thought the same. Were she not a descendant of Junior Marshal Brother Han, I might have used a soul search technique on her to see what she is concealing. But out of consideration for her relationship with Junior Marshal Brother Han, this vicious soul-damaging technique cannot be used on her. After all, Junior Marshal Brother Han is exceptionally fond of this particular descendant. He even exhausted much of his vitality to employ heaven-defying arts to cleanse her essence for the sake of allowing this girl to reach core formation. But since she didn't conceal anything particularly crucial, I am disinclined to pursue the matter. However, it is quite troublesome for the wood spirit nascent to fall into this old fellow's hands. It is but a silver lining that it was the wood spirit nascent that was captured, and not the other two spirit nascents. I recalled the wood spirit nascent to only be a spare. Although it was slightly inferior, it was nurtured at the time for observation. I truly don't know whether or not there will come a day where the five-element spirit nascents will come into existence. The middle-aged man earnestly said, the secret art of the five-element spirit nascent is a magnificent technique that was originally lost by the sect. Were it not for the Earth Spirit Nascent that Marshall Sr. unintentionally refined a few years ago, I fear that the sect would still be unable to gather together the 5-element Spirit Nascents. So long as the Spirit Nascents are properly prepared, they are able to merge into a single disciple's body through the use of a secret technique. Not long from now, our controlling Spirit Sect will come to suddenly possess 5 nascent soul cultivators, allowing us to contend with the harmonious Bond Sect for the chief position in the Devil Tao. However, it is a pity that, while they will possess a nascent soul cultivator's abilities, they will lack the lifespan of one. As for the Wood Spirit Nascent, it turned out that the Spirit Nascent was truly refined too early. It was the most violent amongst them and was tremendously brutal and difficult to tame. It was reported to have devoured the nascent soul of one of our sect's nascent soul cultivators long ago. It would have been extremely difficult to fuse it with a body, so it's actually rather fortunate that it was the one that was lost. I'm well aware. That Wood Spirit Nascent had somewhat managed to gain a consciousness over 1,000 years ago. Moreover, it had snuck into the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion and snuck a glance at many secret techniques, allowing it to acquire vast and powerful abilities and escape its restrictions. If there hadn't been a late nascent soul cultivator elder that was standing guard at the time, and had he not suppressed it in one fell swoop, a calamity would have been unleashed upon this world. However, I reckon that if this spirit nascent were to fuse with a disciple, they would possess the abilities of a mid-nascent soul cultivator. Although it isn't very likely to occur, it still isn't something that can easily be given up. It's rather funny. Not only is it impossible to strengthen the 5-element spirit nascent spiritual power, but it is actually required to constantly weaken the spirit nascent's cultivation to prevent backlash to the disciple's soul when they merge with it. For that very reason, we sent a party to bring the wood spirit nascent to cleanse its body of gold and wind in gold-scarce valley in the state of Yuanwu. When the middle-aged man heard this, he thought to say something as consolation, but he thought better of it and remained silent with a bitter smile on his face. A month later, Han Li had finally arrived in the state of Zai and returned to his own cave residence. Han Li sighed and placed the woman surnamed Liu inside a meditation room before paying a visit to Mu Paling. Greatly satisfied to see that she was still in secluded cultivation, Han Li decided to pay a visit to the 2 elders of Drifting Cloud Mountain instead, and let them know that he had returned. The 2 nascent soul cultivators were happy to see Han Li and asked him what he was doing on his travels. Han Li skirted around the question and merely mentioned that he had killed a few Ghost Spirit Sect and Devil Flame Sect Core Formation disciples on his travels. Rather than display any sign of worry, the 2 nascent soul cultivators praised him instead. It appeared the 2 held deep grudges against the righteous and Devil Tao. The silver-haired old man in particular had been forced to use a secret technique to preserve his life in a previous battle. This had caused great harm to his vitality that still hadn't recovered, so Han Li's actions had allowed them to vent their resentments vicariously. Han Li felt even more at ease about the matter and had a chat with them for a long while before he returned to his cave residence. On his way back, he began to ponder over how he should deal with the white-clothed beauty. When cultivator Liu slowly awakened, she was absent-minded and her eyes were half-opened. When she saw that there was a face so close to her own, she couldn't help but jump up and walk back until her back hit a wall. At that moment, she discovered the owner of the face belonged to a beautiful young woman that was sweetly smiling at her. She glanced around to find herself in a sealed room. There was nothing in the room apart from a circular praying mat. The woman happily said, "Fellow Taoist has awakened. If there is nothing wrong, I will be taking you to see Master." Liu Yu's mind was still fuzzy and she still hadn't realized what was happening. She hesitantly asked, "Master, who is he? Where is this place?" Silvermoon examined the woman's startled figure and slowly said, "If you follow me, you'll have your answers. As for this place, it is the Dreamcloud Mountains in the state of Zai. You should know where that is." After a moment of thought, she immediately realized something and couldn't help but shout, "Dreamcloud Mountains in the state of Zai. You're a Heavenly Tao Alliance member." Silvermoon's eyes flickered and she said, "Fellow Taoist truly is intelligent. This place belongs to the Heavenly Tao Alliance's Drifting Cloud Sect. You'd best go quickly and not keep my master waiting." "Fine, this young woman also wishes to see this senior. I will trouble fellow Taoist to lead the way." The white-clothed woman was able to quickly regain her calm, showing herself to be an unordinary character. Silvermoon faintly smiled and elegantly walked out of the room as the white-clothed cultivator silently followed after her. A short moment later, the 2 women arrived before a large hall. Han Li was sitting in a stone chair, looking a large, deep yellow light barrier at the center of the room. It contained a spirit beast that was violently pounding against the barrier to no avail. Liu Yu attentively examined the spirit beast and discovered that it appeared like a green bull with scales on its back and hoofs of silver. It was a rarely seen iron rhino. Although this spirit beast isn't a remnant of an ancient race, it is an immensely rare spirit beast in the cultivation world. The recently exterminated Fu clan in the state of Yuan Wu kept such a spirit beast. It was said to have strength to rival a mid-core formation cultivator. Could it be the same beast? If the bull was one and the same, then the person before her was the one who exterminated the Fu clan. Liu Yu grew inwardly fearful of Han Li's viciousness. There was nothing good that could come from being captured by this nascent soul cultivator. He was also amazed by Han Li's youthful appearance. After all, male cultivators rarely cultivated appearance-halting techniques. To reach late nascent soul stage, one usually appeared middle-aged at the very least. Of course, these middle-aged cultivators were often far older than their appearances suggested. It was merely because of their high cultivation that their appearances aged slower. As a result, it wasn't rare for old men to address a middle-aged cultivator as martial uncle or martial ancestor. At that moment, Silvermoon stood in front of Han Li and solemnly said, "Master, I've brought the fellow Taoist from the controlling spirit sect." Han Li nodded and said, "You may leave." "Yes, master," Silvermoon replied to Han Li's command with a smile and quietly withdrew. They both knew that Silvermoon wouldn't be able to last much longer in her human form. Liu Yu restlessly walked towards Han Li and gracefully saluted him before standing at the side. She revealed a dainty appearance in her deferential and obedient actions. Han Li coldly glanced at the woman before turning his gaze to the iron rhino inside the light barrier. A sliver of lightning shot from his fingertip, penetrating the barrier and striking the spirit beast. The iron rhino's body sparked with electricity. With a wail, it fell onto its side, and its legs began to incessantly twitch as it helplessly remained on the floor. Liu Yu's obedient expression slightly changed upon seeing such a powerful spirit beast being struck down with a single blow, but soon after, she regained her calm. Han Li was able to sense this and could clearly hear that her heartbeat was slightly faster than before. At that moment, Han Li's gaze returned to the white-clothed woman. He calmly asked, "What is your name, fellow Taoist, and why were you following me? It is quite understandable if the Devil Flame sect and the Ghost Spirit sect were to track me down, but I don't recall ever provoking your controlling spirit sect." Liu Yu was stunned upon hearing Han Li's question and her expression became slightly warped. She bit her lip and softly replied, "Senior captured our sect's wood spirit nascent. This little woman had no choice but to follow orders to pursue your tracks. If I've offended you, I hope you won't bring yourself down to my level. I was only following orders." Given the amazing abilities of a nascent soul cultivator, this woman clearly understood that if she didn't speak the truth, her knowledge could be forcefully obtained through a soul-scouring technique. She had no intention of having her soul damaged and then turning into an idiot. Han Li frowned and immediately recalled the monstrous little silhouette. "Wood spirit nascent. You're talking about that green demon nascent." Liu Yu explained with a bitter smile, "That's right. That is the spirit nascent. It was originally refined by our controlling spirit sect with immense care and effort. It is extremely important to our sect, but we didn't expect that it would manage to flee and end up being captured by you." Han Li's gaze flickered and he coldly said, "Refined. I originally believed this to be a demon spirit's incarnation. However, this small thing was truly troublesome. If I hadn't come along, your group definitely wouldn't have been able to deal with it." Liu Yu revealed a trace of embarrassment and was at a loss of what to say. Fortunately, Han Li was able to make out her true thoughts and pensively asked another question. "How were you able to track down the captured spirit nascent so quickly? Could it be something was done to it? If that's the case, I should have been able to detect it with my spiritual sense." Your reports that there are no pursuing restrictions placed on the spirit nascent. Rather, my senior martial sister and I cultivate a particular secret technique that is able to sense the approximate location of the wood spirit nascent from afar. As such, my martial senior sent us to track it. Of course, we are only able to sense it from a certain distance. If it is too far away, say 100,000 kilometers, my senior martial sister and I would be unable to perceive its location. Not only did Liu Yu appear to be complete truthful in answering Han Li's question, but she also took the initiative to mention some relevant information. When Han Li heard this, he nodded his head. Regardless of whether she was telling the truth, this woman's tactfulness was rather pleasing. However, his following question came as a great shock to her. Since your controlling spirit sect has spent such vast resources on the spirit nascent, it must be extremely useful. Why don't you tell me about it? When Han Li said this, he narrowed his eyes as he silently stared at her. A cold glint was present in his gaze. Liu Yu betrayed a sliver of hesitation from her face. When her gaze met Han Li's icy expression, she shivered and reluctantly replied, "The wood spirit nascent is indeed as you say. When refining a particular technique, a cultivator with wood spiritual roots would be able to fuse with it and take the spirit nascent as one's own nascent soul. Without having to condense one's own nascent soul, they would possess both the abilities and cultivation of a nascent soul cultivator." She didn't hesitate to divulge the secret matters of the spirit nascent despite knowing the trouble it would cause when she returned to the controlling spirit sect. She understood that if she didn't speak, she wouldn't survive. This nascent soul cultivator definitely wasn't the sort to pity the fairer sex, and she could only be concerned for her safety at the time being. Han Li was startled by her words, but after calming down, he said, "So there was such a method to directly enter nascent soul stage. If this is true, then why hasn't your controlling spirit sect already unified the devil Dao? Surely it wouldn't be content with being below the harmonious bond sect. Could there be a restriction to this secret technique?" With a smooth and pleasant voice, Liu Yu said, "Senior is truly insightful. This spirit nascent is something that cannot be refined in large quantities. Although this secret technique was found long ago, it is incredibly difficult to refine a spirit nascent. Not only are its materials incredibly rare, but only the sect elders whose lifespans are drawing close may attempt to refine one. These deceased elders' nascent souls seem to be necessary for their refinement. Also, the appearance of each spirit nascent will only occur by chance. In over 10 attempts, there may not be even one success. The Great Fusion technique also requires 5 spirit nascents of different elements to use. It would fail otherwise. Our controlling spirit sect has been accumulating these spirit nascents until now, but have only gathered together about 7. They had always been lacking the gold spirit nascent, but it was finally acquired several tens of years ago. As such, the sect immediately chose 10 core formation cultivators specifically as candidates to fuse with the spirit nascents and cultivate the related secret techniques. As things develop, 5 will be chosen to conduct the fusion ceremony. While Han Li's expression was unfazed, his heart greatly stirred. He held his chin in hand and began to mutter to himself. A long moment later, he slowly said, "Since these cultivators were able to cheat their way into nascent soul stage, there are certain to be a few flaws." Han Li couldn't help but draw similarities to fiend cores. Nurturing spirit nascents should also prove to be an incredibly difficult matter. Senior is right. Although I don't know of the other flaws, I do know that cultivators that merge with a spirit nascent will still only retain their lifespan as a core formation cultivator. One also forfeits their true opportunity to condense a nascent soul by using this secret technique. Their cultivation will also remain stagnant, and so will their lifespan. However, there are still many advantages to be had. Since this point had been reached, the woman resolved herself to give the full details. After all, speaking more wouldn't make matters worse. With the woman's explanation, Han Li had a general understanding of the wood spirit nascent that he captured. It was somewhat similar to his weeping soul beast as a spiritual object that was refined by human hands. However, its viciousness was clear to see from its ability to devour a cultivator's primal soul. It was far different from his weeping soul beast in the past. Han Li's mind stirred and he broached another topic. "These 6-winged frost centipedes of yours are rather uncommon. How did you acquire them? Given your current cultivation, it should be impossible for you to use insects of such an ancient lineage. Haven't your martial seniors or uncles pried into this matter?" Liu Yu was caught somewhat off guard and remained shocked for a moment. With puzzled thoughts, she bewilderedly replied, "So Senior also recognizes those insects. Junior found their eggs in an abandoned cave residence of an ancient cultivator. I originally believed the eggs to be dead and unhatchable, but after another examination, I found several that were alive. However, my sect seniors mentioned that although this insect was an ancient species and would have vast abilities when fully grown, they are extremely difficult to nurture. With all the right conditions, they would be able to fully grow in about 1,000 years' time. As such, there were no cultivators that wished to take them. Junior believes their abilities to be impressive despite being merely in their infancy. As such, I decided to keep them." Did he ask about the insects because he was interested in them despite his current cultivation? Since a nascent soul cultivator is able to live only 1,000 years, surely he wouldn't spend so much time and effort on these 6-winged frost centipedes. Liu Yu remained perplexed despite much thought. Han Li looked at her and calmly said something that made the woman's heart drop. I am rather interested in your six-winged frost centipedes, and I have a way to make them ascend by 2 grades in a short amount of time. Would fellow Taoists be interested in making an exchange with me? Liu Yu's eyes brightly flickered and she flirtatiously said, if Senior wishes for me to do something, please don't hesitate to say it. Han Li ignored her actions and insipidly said, I can help fellow Taoist mature her 6-winged frost centipedes, but all the eggs they lay belong to me. I have use for them. Also, I heard your controlling spirit sect's insect control techniques are rather original. Would you be able to teach them to me? Insect control technique, Liu Yu's smile froze. High-grade secret techniques for controlling insects and beasts were of the utmost importance to the sect. It was considered an act of treason if one were to divulge them to outsiders. Although she had already intended to completely obey Han Li, her face vastly changed upon hearing him, and she bitterly cursed it in her heart. Liu Yu looked at Han Li and anxiously said, Senior should know that if I were to leak the sect's techniques without permission, I would have my soul refined. If I were to give the secret technique to you, you should know what will happen to me. So long as I acquire the insect eggs and the technique, you may leave free. I won't stop you in the slightest. As for where you go next, the world is large. Can't you just stand on your own? Han Li spoke of the matter as if it were trivial. Liu Yu's expression wavered upon hearing him. A long while later, she wryly smiled and spoke with a distressed tone. Senior speaks of it rather lightly, but I understand my own situation well. If I were to become a vagrant cultivator, I would have no chance of reaching nascent soul stage. Also, I already know of Senior's identity and background. How could Senior allow me to easily leave? I fear I'd be dead when I leave. Han Li remained entirely indifferent before her words and said, What do you mean? Are you accusing me of making a false vow, or are you trying to blackmail me? Liu Yu shook her head and said, Blackmail? I wouldn't dare. I'm merely looking for a way to defend myself. How do you plan on doing that? Liu Yu gracefully bowed her head. If Senior doesn't find it distasteful, this little woman would like to become your disciple. Does Senior find me acceptable? You wish to become my disciple? Han Li was truly shocked. Yes, with Senior's cultivation, I am more than willing to become your disciple. As your disciple, I would be granted your protection and would have no qualms about divulging the techniques of the controlling spirit sect. Else, if Senior doesn't kill me, the controlling spirit sect would surely pursue me for the rest of my life. The white-clothed woman revealed a trace of dread. Han Li frowned and began to tap the side of the chair as he pondered. He stroked his chin and indifferently said, From what you've said, you haven't yet taken a master in the controlling spirit sect. But if you were to become my disciple, how would you confront your clan? Surely you understand that the Heavenly Tao Alliance and the Devil Tao are hostile to one another. Liu Yu calmly answered, From foundation establishment to core formation, this junior relied on chance every step of the way and never took a master. As for my clan, I am its last member. Cultivators appear in so few numbers after all, and all the others have passed away, leaving behind only me. Han Li mysteriously smiled and said, If you're only becoming my disciple for the sake of protection, it isn't an impossible matter, but I must first mention that I will place a soul restriction on you. I also won't be involved with your cultivation. In short, you will only be my in-name disciple. You will enter the Drifting Cloud sect and cultivate on your own. What do you think? Liu Yu replied without hesitation, placing down the soul restriction is only natural. After all, I was a controlling spirit sect cultivator. So long as Senior shelters me from danger, I will have no complaints. As for cultivation guidance, I never dared to have hope for that considering that I only managed to preserve my life by a fluke. She seemed to follow the same path of bitter cultivation that Han Li had experienced. With the woman's blunt agreement, a strange expression flickered from his eyes and he grew silent for a moment before nodding. Good. Since you've agreed to these conditions, I will naturally uphold my end of the agreement. Tomorrow, I will bring you to the 2 other elders of Drifting Cloud Mountains and have you enter the sect under a different name. Many thanks for your kindness, Senior. Liu Yu felt greatly relieved with the knowledge that her life was secure and hastily saluted Han Li. Han Li waved his arm and said, Return to the silent room and rest. I will be placing a soul restriction on you later and will remove the restrictions to your magic power as well. After expressing her thanks once more, she respectfully took her leave from the hall. A flash of yellow light came from one of the hall's walls, revealing Silvermoon in her human form. Han Li glanced at Silvermoon and asked with a flat tone, You still haven't reverted back to your original form. This servant has made great progress in cultivating her fox body. Of course, This led to an increase in the time I can take this form. However, Master, do you truly plan on taking this girl as a disciple? I recall that Master was never fond of the idea, fearing it would cause problems through implication and interfere with your cultivation. Are the six-winged frost centipedes so important to Master? If you're talking solely about the secret insect control technique, you can simply draw it out through the dreamtear technique. The woman's eyes stirred while she spoke, and she appeared puzzled. Henley leaned his body against the back of his chair and wore a lazy expression. You're not wrong. I truly do hold the six-winged frost centipedes in high regard. At my current pace of refining the celestial ice flames only a sliver at a time, I reckon it will take quite a while before I will be able to complete refine it. Silvermoon hesitated for a moment and asked, do you know how long? Tell the truth, it will take 200 years at the very least to refine all the flames, given that there needs to be a buffer of a year between each sliver. This would take far too long, which is where the six-winged frost centipedes come in. Their icy chi would be able to greatly shorten the amount of time it would take to refine the flames. Furthermore, it will have a certain fantastical effect when applied to the celestial ice flames. Hanli then raised his hands and extended a finger from each. Under Silvermoon's astonished gaze, each of his fingertips flickered with a white and a blue light. There was a frost that was white as snow, along with an icy flame that glowed a brilliant blue. They then nimbly hovered off of his fingertips. Silvermoon yelped in surprise, this. Henley calmly breathed out, spitting a small cloud of azure chi onto the frost and the blue flames. The frost and blue flames then turned into specks of starlight and began to mix together. Soon after, a muffled boom sounded out, and a blinding white-blue light illuminated the room. A small violet flame bird appeared from within the azure chi and began to flap its wings. It appeared quite graceful as it flew in circles. Hanli revealed satisfaction upon seeing the thumb-sized violet bird. There was even a trace of excitement that was betrayed from deep within his eyes. Silvermoon, do you remember the sacred Usra flames that the old devil bone sage used? Silvermoon cried out in astonishment. The sacred Usra flames. Of course I remember. Those are the devil flame known as the sacred flames of the ghost Tao. If the bone sage had truly refined them, there would have been few in this world that could be his match. However, the flames you've used don't seem very similar to what the bone sage displayed during that day. Of course not. These aren't the sacred Usra flames. But while I don't know the specifics behind this particular flame, its might is clearly superior to the celestial ice flames. If I haven't guessed incorrectly, once the flames are fused with the six-winged frost centipedes, icy chi, their might will increase to the point where they could rival the sacred Usra flames. This was something I had unintentionally discovered after I absorbed the centipede's icy chi. A fortunate coincidence indeed. Once that was said, Hanli twirled his finger and had the bird disappear into his hand. Silvermoon was initially stunned, but soon she revealed delight. With a salute and a gorgeous smile, she said, "This servant congratulates Master. The celestial ice flames were something that common nascent soul cultivators didn't dare to touch. With these newly fused devil flames, Master would be able to dominate the entirety of the heavenly south." Hanli shook his head and sullenly said, "Dominate the heavenly south. Those words are too bold. I do not know how many late nascent soul cultivators are in the heavenly south, but each of these eccentrics should possess many years of vast experience and have their own killing moves. Perhaps one of them might have something to restrain my devil flames." Silvermoon pursed her lips and revealed a careless expression. Master is being too modest. How could such an opportune matter occur in this world? Henley smiled and said, "It's hard to be sure. The gold-devouring beetles may be incisive and are highly ranked, but the bludgeoned spiders happen to be able to restrain them despite their vastly lower rank. If I were to run into a cultivator that knows about these beetles and possesses jade or wooden treasures, it would prove vastly disadvantageous for the beetles. There will also be something that can restrain these devil flames. In this entire world, there is no such thing as a treasure or technique that is unrivaled. Master is still quite a careful and cautious person. From what you're saying, you must want to prepare several killing moves to prevent yourself from being restrained by others." As if not yet finished speaking, Hanli unhurriedly continued, "I've previously never accepted disciples because my cultivation was lacking and I was a wanderer, with my residence ever changing. It would have been burdensome to take a disciple. But now that I am firmly established at the Drifting Cloud sect, it is natural to nurture a few sources of influence of my own. Although one's own strength is extremely important in the cultivation world, it is more dangerous and inconvenient to stand alone. At the very least, useful information will make its way to me. For example, there was no one who had taken the initiative to inform me of the trade meet that would take place in the state of Yu in 2 years. Although those two elders would notify me at the last second, I wouldn't be able to make any preparations. As for Liu Yu, while her cultivation isn't very high, she doesn't seem to be someone that is only able to diligently cultivate. After entering the Drifting Cloud sect, I reckon she would strive her hardest to develop her own influence without my orders. Silvermoon smiled and added on, with the sole restriction placed on her, she will be unable to betray you until her cultivation surpasses masters. Her influence will therefore naturally be your own. This is far more advantageous than accepting an ordinary disciple. Han Li glanced at Silvermoon and indifferently said, "It's good that you know." He then turned his gaze towards the iron rhino. The spirit beast had managed to unsteadily raise itself, but its aggressiveness was vastly reduced. It now gazed at Han Li with a trace of fear. Although this spirit beast isn't very useful for me, I'm able to directly control it through the use of a magic tool since it belonged to a clan. I will be able to trade it for very good materials. After you train it, shut it in the spirit beast room. Once the trade meet in the state of Yu takes place, I'll see whether or not I can exchange it for a few rare materials. I'll be leaving now to place a sole restriction on Liu Yu. Han Li took a black command talisman from his storage pouch and handed it over to Silvermoon. Silvermoon took it into her hands and respectfully replied, "As you command, master." Han Li then stood up and wordlessly left the room. Silvermoon fiddled with the command talisman in her hand and muttered to herself with a pensive expression, as if pondering about what Han Li just said. A moment later, she raised the command medallion towards the light barrier with a smile. A beam of yellow light then shot out. Soon after, a series of miserable bellows filled the hall. After Han Li placed the sole restriction onto Liu Yu, he brought her to the silver-haired old man. Of course, he didn't give the complete truth. He merely mentioned that they had a bit of relationship, and he had brought her back to the state of Zai from the controlling spirit sect, intending to take her in as a disciple and look after her. When the old man heard this, he was initially stunned before laughing with an expression of realization. I was wondering why Junior Marshal Brother Han made a trip to the Devil Dao's domain, so it turned out to be for Marshal Niece Liu. Good, very good. This sect could always use another core formation cultivator, and a woman at that. The silver-haired old man accepted Liu Yu into the Drifting Cloud sect without a problem. Han Li was very satisfied by this and chatted with the old man a while more before departing with the woman. Liu Yu then officially changed her name to Liu Mei and officially became Han Li's in-name disciple. Although Han Li said he wouldn't personally guide the woman, he wasn't about to be stingy when taking a disciple underneath him. He gave the woman 2 magic treasures and several bottles of demon core refined medicine pills. If Liu Mei had been reluctant about taking Han Li as a master, she was now more than happy to pay her respects to him after such magnanimous gifts. For the first time, she felt that leaving the controlling spirit sect to become Han Li's disciple wasn't such a bad thing. Fortunately, this woman was rather quick-witted and soon handed over a jade slip containing all of the insect-controlling techniques that she knew of. She also handed over her 6-winged frost centipedes. Han Li accepted these items with a calm expression and concluded the disciple acceptance ceremony. After departing Han Li's cave residence, she established her own cave residence at the Drifting Cloud sect's White Phoenix Mountain and became a member of the Drifting Cloud sect's high-grade cultivators. Unclear as to whether or not the silver-haired old man was paying face to Han Li, Liu Mei was appointed as Deputy Mountain Lord of White Phoenix Mountain, giving Mountain Lord Song an assistant. When Han Li heard of the matter, he merely smiled. After Han Li acquired the centipedes, he used the rainbow skirt grass to mature them. Given that they had this effect towards the gold-devouring beetles, they should also affect the 6-winged frost centipedes as well. Of course, he also entered a secluded room and began to study the insect control techniques alongside the profound nascent formation arts that Xin Ryan had left behind. Han Li sat motionlessly on the floor with his eyes shut as an azure light began to flow around his body as if he were cultivating a technique. A long while later, he opened his eyes and his eyes brightened. He promptly grabbed onto the storage pouch at his waist and wordlessly pointed, uttering, "Execute." Suddenly, several thousands of black-tainted gold-devouring beetles flocked from the pouch and hastily turned into a 3-meter large cloud that spiraled above Han Li. Han Li stood up without any hesitation and began to move his feet in a pattern as he muttered to himself. He raised his hands and shot a mist of azure light, enveloping the beetle cloud. The gold-devouring beetles suddenly stopped buzzing and began to hover back and forth in tight formation. However, none of them made contact with one another, making for a bizarre sight. Hanli's gaze brightly flickered as he watched the beetle cloud. He stared for a time before forming an incantation gesture with a single hand. He then extended his free hand as if reaching for the beetles and softly shouted. Azure light flickered from the beetle cloud, and they immediately fell onto Hanli, enveloping him within them. The beetles were several times quicker than before and began to frantically fly circles around him, forming an impenetrable barrier. Hanli smiled at the sight, but that smile soon disappeared as he began to utter profound and cryptic incantations. Suddenly, the insect cloud suddenly charged towards Hanli with a sudden eruption of blinding azure light. A short moment later, the light disappeared to reveal Hanli's body covered in armor with simple designs of gold, silver, and black. The armor sparkled with azure light and continuously glinted. From a glance, one could tell it was incredibly hard and durable. Hanli's smile became a grin, and he stroked the armor. It felt unfathomably smooth, as if it were without flaw. Hanli's smile faded away, and he sighed, muttering, "Not bad. I truly didn't think that my idea from Heaven Void Hall of using beetles as armor would work. The Controlling Spirit Sect are truly worthy of their fame for their insect control techniques. They are far more powerful than I could have imagined." The insect control techniques weren't difficult to cultivate, and given Hanli's current cultivation and comprehension, they were easily learned. Even so, these secret techniques greatly broadened Hanli's horizons, and the many recorded methods to direct insects to attack were fascinating and impressive. The insect armor technique in particular had allowed him to act on his previous musings of the idea. Previously, he was able to concentrate the black-tainted gold-devouring beetles into simple forms such as blades. However, objects as complicated as battle armor were still out of reach. It was a difficult matter that couldn't be resolved. With the insect armor technique contained within the Jade slip, he was able to skillfully learn how to condense battle armor in only a month. Hanli was brimming with delight. He was convinced the expert that founded this technique was likely to have possessed insects as hardy as the gold-devouring beetles, whose defensive power wasn't inferior to true armor-type treasures. Additionally, this technique wasn't well known considering there were so few insect cultivators. In the hands of Hanli, and with the incredible durability of the black-tainted gold-devouring beetles along with their particular transformation abilities, this technique could create battle armor that was well suited for himself, and possessed immense defensive ability that surpassed those of common armors. Moreover, once his pure gold-devouring beetles fully matured, and he was more skilled with the insect control techniques, Hanli was confident they would be able to transform into even more impressive armor. With the thought of the fully evolved gold-devouring beetles, he found it difficult to contain his excitement. A short moment later, Hanli eventually regained his calm. He stroked his armor in a moment of thought before blowing a mouthful of spiritual chi onto the armor. The armor quickly scattered back into the cloud of beetles and returned to the spirit beast pouch under Hanli's orders. He returned to sitting cross-legged on the ground and took out an azure jade slip from his storage pouch, the item that Xin Ryan had left behind. He clasped it with both hands and narrowed his eyes before quickly immersing his spiritual sense into the jade slip. He skipped past the ancient formation spells for the time being and sought the profound nascent formation arts at the very end. This technique was founded by an unnamed devil Dao cultivator in the age of antiquity. Not only was the incantation profound and cryptic, but its words were dense with hidden and rich meaning. Hanli studied each of the words with great deliberation. After half a year passed, Hanli had a greater understanding of the technique. This had led to him feeling great awe and respect towards the ancient cultivator that founded this technique. This technique did indeed have some similarities to the Righteous Dao's Three Truth Severance Arts. As for precisely how much, Hanli had no way of knowing, as it would be impossible for him to access the greatest secret technique of the Righteous Dao. Still, it stood to reason that this technique was entirely different from the external incarnation technique. This heaven-defying technique truly created a second incarnation of oneself. Once this technique was fully cultivated, one would possess an entirely independent nascent soul. Although there was something of a master-servant relationship between the two, each one would be able to survive if the other met an unexpected end. It was merely that the secondary nascent soul suffer a great loss in vitality if the main nascent soul were to perish, before it could slowly take the place of the main nascent soul. If the secondary nascent soul were to perish, it would leave the main nascent soul completely unaffected. What made Han Li even more excited was that the second nascent soul could be fused into the body of a superior cultivator's corpse and form an incarnation. Once the incarnation was complete, it was a genuine existence outside of the main body. Even if his main body perished, Han Li would survive so long as the incarnation did. After all, both bodies would hold the exact same memories and emotions. This technique was entirely different from when he had Crooked Soul become a Fiend Core incarnation. Crooked Soul was merely a puppet that Han Li could control with a sliver of his primal soul. It had no emotions of its own nor independent ability. Furthermore, Crooked Soul had to be in range of Han Li's spiritual sense, else he would lose control. As for the incarnation created from the profound nascent formation arts, it could exist entirely on its own regardless of distance. It would take independent action without orders as if it were just another cultivator. Han Li felt his blood run cold when he read this, but after some further reading, he eventually reached the description of the technique's restrictions and flaws. Once Han Li read through them, it felt like he had been drenched in cold water. His fervent excitement had disappeared in an instant. The difficulty of condensing a nascent soul had left him completely speechless. It took common cultivators centuries to fragment their core and form a nascent soul. Cultivating a second nascent soul would require a second core to shatter, which would take far too much time. The only method would be to seize another cultivator's nascent soul and erase its consciousness. Once it is assimilated with one's own spiritual sense, it would become one's nascent soul. Although the Jade slip mentioned the method to seize and wipe the consciousness of another nascent soul, needless to say, it was an extremely dangerous matter with low odds of success. Even if this managed to somehow succeed in a fluke, the assimilation process was even more dangerous. Given that a nascent soul was temporarily seized, forcefully assimilating it with oneself still risked having one's spiritual sense being devoured by the target nascent soul in the process. Of course, if this managed to succeed, one would have a second nascent soul along with its many benefits. If one wished to take it a step further and create an incarnation, one merely needed to find a suitable corpse and have the second nascent soul possess it. Of course, the greater the cultivation of the original body, the better. It would be optimal if it were the body of a nascent soul cultivator, so that the secondary nascent soul would be able to fully utilize its powers. Nevertheless, nascent soul cultivators couldn't speak lightly of killing a cultivator of a similar grade. It was an incredibly difficult matter, and even with Han Li's great might he doubted his own ability to do so. Of course, even if the profound nascent formation succeeded, one still wasn't free of worry. There was still a chance of backlash. Incarnation would be equivalent to refining another self. With the passage of time, there would be discrepancies between their emotions and memories that would appear. The incarnation may even strive its hardest to seize control over the main body. Especially when the incarnation possessed superior power to the main body, there was a chance it would take advantage of its special connection to the main body to restrain it, reversing their positions. As such, although an incarnation can be separated by vast distances and carry out the orders of the main body, it is best to not have it stray too far away. Every so often, one must perform the profound nascent formation arts, unification technique to dispel the inner demons of each soul and converge their primal souls into one, strengthening the primary soul's control over the incarnation. Of course, in addition to the incarnation backlash, the incarnation also possessed its own flaws, but they weren't nearly as significant. In fact, when the second nascent soul was acquired, it was already considered initial success stage for the profound nascent formation arts. Without any need to cultivate a second incarnation, one had a vast advantage in battle. The second nascent soul would be able to use various powerful abilities and greatly increase the chance of survival without any danger from backlash. Han Li's expression was sullen as he examined the advantages and drawbacks of this cultivation art. Although it was incredibly difficult to cultivate, it possessed a proportionately powerful ability that he wasn't about to easily relinquish. So long as he fully cultivated it, it would be equivalent to having an additional life, an extremely captivating proposition. As for how he would acquire another cultivator's nascent soul, Han Li suddenly recalled the wood spirit nascent that he had captured earlier. Han Li frowned and took out the jade box from his storage pouch. He gently stroked the jade box and remained silent for a long while. He heard a bit of the wood spirit nascent's origins from Liu Mei and naturally knew that it was quite different from ordinary nascent souls. However, it also stood to reason that the controlling spirit sect's 5-element spirit nascence technique had a few similarities with the profound nascent formation technique. Since this spirit nascent was to be fused with a core formation cultivator, refining the wood spirit nascent as a second nascent soul should follow the same principles and prove to be possible. Besides, he had no other uses for the wood spirit nascent, so there would be no harm in trying. As for the danger of seizing it and erasing the consciousness of the nascent soul, it shouldn't prove to be a problem with assistance from his other treasures and his powerful spiritual sense. The only problem he had to worry about was the assimilation of the formless nascent soul. If any problems occurred, he could only sever the portion of his spiritual sense that occupied the nascent soul, causing great harm to his soul in the process. It was difficult to say if such an outcome would result in any lasting influence to his mind. With that thought, Han Li began to wear a face of hesitation. After glancing at the jade box in his hand for most of the day, Han Li sighed and slowly placed it back into his storage pouch. Azure light then flashed from his hands and the azure jade slip reappeared. Should he take the risk to refine a second nascent soul, he would put the decision off until he fully comprehended the incantations for the profound nascent formation arts. This matter was dangerous and extremely difficult, as such it would be better if he were cautious. With his mind made up, he sank his spiritual sense into the jade slip and entered a state of obliviousness. Not far away from Han Li, Silvermoon was peacefully cultivating in her own secluded room. All of the other miscellaneous tasks were being handled by Han Li's 8 puppets. Time quickly went by, and yet another year had passed. One day, 2 streaks of light, one azure and one white, flew in the direction of Han Li's cave residence. 2 silhouettes could be faintly made out from within them. They were the 2 drifting cloud sect elders, a silver-haired old man and a sallow-faced middle-aged man. They couldn't help but exchange a smile when they saw that the restrictions around Han Li's residence were in full effect. The middle-aged man surnamed Lu flicked his finger and sent a previously prepared letter talisman into the restrictions in a streak of fiery light. Once the talisman disappeared from sight, he smiled to the silver-haired old man and said, "It seems ever since junior martial brother Han returned, he remained within his cave residence in diligent cultivation." The silver-haired old man surnamed Cheng spoke with a strange expression. "That is to be expected. How else could junior martial brother Han have formed a nascent soul in 200 years? It is a pity that the end of my lifespan is drawing close. I am incapable of treading further on the path of immortal cultivation, and I reckon you know this too." The middle-aged man hastily consoled him. "Senior martial brother Cheng must be joking. He still has another 200 years ahead of him at the very least." The silver-haired old man shook his head and calmly said, "He, junior martial brother Lu, how could I not know of my own circumstances? Perhaps if I hadn't been wounded from the last battle, I might have been able to live another 200 years without a problem. But despite my full recovery, the battle caused great harm to my vitality. It is something that cannot be solved through meditation." "Senior martial brother." The middle-aged man's expression changed, and he thought to say something, but the old man interrupted him with a wave of his hand. The old man slowly said, "Even if I enter no further battles, I will live only 60 years more at most. That much is certain. There is no need to comfort me. Why else would I have so painstakingly roped junior martial brother Han into our drifting cloud sect? I have even done my best to befriend him. Normally, even if we were truly impatient about taking him into our sect, we would have done a meticulous investigation into his background. Fortunately, our hasty judgment has turned out to be correct. Although this person's history is somewhat complicated, he holds no ulterior motives towards our drifting cloud sect." The middle-aged man was stunned. Senior martial brother sent disciples to investigate junior martial brother Han's background. That's right. Although junior martial brother Han's background is rather vague, with his name and appearance, I've sent disciples to stealthily make some inquiries into the state of UA, and ended up with a rough background of our junior martial brother Han. You might not believe it, but over 100 years ago, our junior martial brother was originally a Foundation establishment cultivator of Yellow Maple Valley. During that time, he had earned a small reputation for himself. It was said that during the war with the Devil Dao, he alone managed to kill many cultivators of the same grade. When Yellow Maple Valley was later rooted, that treacherous ghost Linghu abandoned him for some reason. Afterwards, there was no further trace of junior martial brother Han. Perhaps he was cultivating in concealment and had only recently emerged when he reached late core formation stage. He then arrived at our drifting cloud sect and formed a nascent soul. It seems that during this missing period, Han Li should have had some fortuitous encounters. The middle-aged man sneered. It is quite ridiculous for him to be abandoned at the time, throwing away a sect disciple that happened to be such a rare cultivation genius. In a short amount of time, he managed to cultivate from foundation establishment stage to nascent soul stage. I reckon that old ghost Ling Hu would be driven mad if he knew about this matter. After all, Yellow Maple Valley hasn't been faring very well in the Nine Nations Union. It should be quite difficult for his sect to rely on him alone. If I recall correctly, he should have entered nascent soul stage the same time senior Marshal Brother Cheng did. The end of his lifespan should also be drawing near. That's right, old ghost Ling Hu is just a bit older than me, but he is quite a bit more proficient at extending his lifespan. Additionally, Yellow Maple Valley should also have no problem after his death. They can just rely on the repute of their allied nascent soul cultivators. I've also had similar worries for the Drifting Cloud sect when I passed, and feared that Junior Marshal Brother would find it difficult to stand alone. If not for the sacred spirit veins of the Dreamcloud Mountains, Junior Marshal Brother would have found it difficult to preserve the sect by himself. But even so, many would look at our sect with greed once it appears any weaker. My original thoughts were to urge Junior Marshal Brother to take the initiative to withdraw from the Dreamcloud Mountains once I passed, avoiding any potential calamity the sect may encounter. But now that Junior Marshal Brother Han has joined us, the situation has changed. Although Junior Marshal Brother seems to be a cultivator who is wholeheartedly dedicated to pursuing the immortal Tao and is disinterested in sect affairs, I am actually relieved by this. So long as we carefully win him over, our sect will continue to exist without worry for another 1,000 years. The silver-haired old man twirled his beard in his hand as if he had a plan up his sleeve. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before worriedly saying, "But while Junior Marshal Brother Han may be a cultivation genius, his age is too young, and he just recently condensed his nascent soul. I don't know whether or not his skills are up to par." With a pensive expression, the silver-haired old man said, "Yes, I also share the same worries. After all, there are few cultivators wholeheartedly dedicated to pursuing the Tao that are unwilling to spend much time cultivating powerful abilities. While this results in a deep cultivation, these cultivators may be unable to defeat cultivators that are a grade lower than them. Although I don't believe Junior Marshal Brother Han to be such a cultivator, it would be better to test this. As such, I will be staying behind to guard the sect. You will accompany him to the trade meet." Does Senior Marshal Brother mean to say? The middle-aged man revealed a sudden trace of understanding. The old man smiled and thought to say something further when the mist in front of him suddenly parted. The old man immediately grew quiet as the middle-aged man followed suit. The two walked into the path that opened through the fog without any reservations and disappeared from sight. The largest trade meet in the heavenly south convened at the southmost country of the Nine Nations Union, the state of Yu. Deep within the mountains of this country laid soaring Heaven City, the capital of the Nine Nations Union. Cultivators from all over the continent flocked to this country. Be it man or woman, young or old, all of those that resided within the city were cultivators. This city alone even had 7 cultivators at mid-nascent soul stage or higher stationed there, resulting in the immediate deaths of any cultivator who dared to cause trouble in the city. As a result, regardless of a cultivator's affiliation, none dared to act imprudently within. 2 months before the start of largest trade meet in the heavenly south, the Nine Nations Alliance activated a spell formation with a resounding reputation, the Greater Light Extinguishing Formation, to protect the city in place of a majority of its normal restrictions. Because a few cultivators have already made their way to the city out of impatience or otherwise, there were already stalls placed inside. Trade was already being conducted between cultivators. While the official days of the trade meet would have treasures of all kind in great number, they weren't something that common cultivators could afford. They would rather find a few suitable uncommon materials ahead of time instead. The quiet, cold, soaring Heaven City soon became bustling with activity, as if it were filled with the liveliness of the marketplaces in common mortal cities. However, those walking the streets of the city were cultivators of high rank, and the currency being used were spirit stones. The city only possessed a single auction house which was under the control of the Nine Nations Union. It had also begun to appraise and auction off all sorts of rare treasures, contributing to the liveliness of the city. Just as the trade meet was only half a month away, there were 3 streaks of light steadily flying through the sky, several thousands of kilometers away. Once the 3 lights grew closer, they were revealed to be 2 men and 1 woman. The woman was a cool and elegant beauty. She flew at the side of a youth with a common appearance that wore a rather intimate expression. The third person in their party was a blue-robed middle-aged man, whose clothes fluttered through the wind in a display of unordinary majesty. The two men were Han Li and Elder Lu, who had traveled from the state of Zai. As for the beautiful female cultivator, she was Han Li's concubine, Mu Paling. The silver-haired old man had stayed behind to keep watch over the drifting cloud sect, preventing any sneaks from stirring up trouble while they were away. According to what the old man said, he had already participated in this grand meeting about 8 times and had no materials that he currently required. Naturally, he wanted to give the opportunity to his younger junior martial brothers instead. As for Mu Paling, she had reached a cultivation bottleneck and encountered Han Li when she left seclusion. When she heard that he was heading to the largest trade meet in the heavenly south, her heart stirred, and she asked to come alongside him to broaden her horizons. After all, if she were incapable of reaching core formation, this may be the only chance she had to participate in this trade meet. Since he wasn't unkind by nature and didn't feel this trade meet to be particularly dangerous, he agreed. After all, having a beautiful companion along on a long trip was a delightful matter. Naturally, the 3 sects of the Dreamcloud Mountains had their own parties of cultivators that set off towards the trade meet, but Han Li was unwilling to travel together with those juniors and had left for the state of Yu ahead of them. By traveling along the route that best avoided the countries of the righteous and devil Dao, the 3 were able to arrive within the borders of the 9 Nations Union without problem. At that moment, Han Li was absent-mindedly examining his nearby surroundings. There were cultivators that occasionally passed by, but when their spiritual sense swept past the middle-aged man surnamed Lu and then Han Li, their expressions displayed shock and they immediately veered off, fearing that they would somehow provoke them. Han Li and Elder Lu were traveling with their cultivation unconcealed. Any cultivator who saw 2 nascent soul cultivators traveling together would be filled with fear and immediately take another route. At the beginning, Mu Paling was unaccustomed to this, but it soon became a common sight. As the party continued to fly through the skies, Elder Lu turned to Han Li and amiably said, "The trade meet is only held once every 100 years. Previously, these trade meets were alternated among the righteous and devilish Dao between the states of Tian Luo and Fengdu. At the time, the Heavenly Dao Alliance still hadn't existed, and the 9 Nations Union was fully suppressed by the Mulan Spell Warriors. As such, this astonishingly profitable gathering was monopolized by the 2 sides. But after the righteous and devilish Dao expanded, neither party felt at ease at having the other party host the trade meeting. As such, the last trade meet was held in the 9 Nations Union without any contest, a loss to both sides that was a great cause for grief. With slight enthusiasm, Han Li said, "Senior Marshal Brother Lu, this is quite convenient for the 9 Nations Union, but I've heard quite a few interesting things about Soaring Heaven City. I heard that it is the only city in the entirety of the Heavenly South that is made up of only cultivators. I heard that in the past, when the armies of Mulan Spell Warriors made their way into the state of Yu, Soaring Heaven City was where the cultivators of the newly formed 9 Nations Union defeated their armies with the assistance of the Greater Light Extinguishing Formation. The battle was said to be truly desperate, resulting in many nascent soul cultivators perishing." Relax, Junior Marshal Brother Han. This Soaring Heaven City definitely won't disappoint you." The Elder Lu chuckled and then probingly asked, "However, I've got the feeling that there is something a bit different about you after you spent some time in seclusion, and it isn't an increase in your cultivation. It seems Junior Marshal Brother has cultivated some sort of secret technique. I can't see any other reason for this strange reason. I had truly cultivated a few techniques, but I've got quite a ways to go before I reach greater mastery of them. But I've heard from other disciples that Senior Marshal Brother Lu's 1,000 Wave Arts is a famed top-grade cultivation art. This junior brother wishes he will soon be able to see it." With a slight smile, Han Li easily turned the subject back to the middle-aged man. Elder Lu shook his head and wryly smiled. "Junior Marshal Brother shouldn't listen to the drivel that those disciples spout. My 1,000 Waves art is simply an ordinary water attribute cultivation technique. While it is rather easy to defeat core formation cultivators with it, I haven't encountered much success with it when used against cultivators of a similar grade. Fortunately, this cultivation art possesses 2 divine abilities that specialize in survival. Even when I'm defeated, I am able to preserve my life." And Li took his words to be mostly true. He recalled that in their last battle with the righteous and devil Dao, Elder Lu was able to return to the Dreamcloud Mountains unharmed. Instead, the silver-haired old man with slightly greater cultivation had suffered heavy injuries before being able to escape. It seems his survival ability was indeed impressive. Han Li's heart stirred, and he thought to say something else when his expression suddenly changed, and he turned his head to the side. Close at Han Li's side, Mu Peiling curiously asked, "Sir, what's happening over there?" Since she became Han Li's concubine, her icy appearance had been replaced with bright eyes and a captivating charm. Han Li frowned for a moment before calmly saying, "There seems to be a squad of cultivators with a nascent soul cultivator heading over that seems to have discovered us." When the middle-aged man followed Han Li's gaze, he wore an expression of astonishment and unconsciously thought better of Han Li. "Yi, that seems to be the case. I didn't expect Junior Martial Brother's spiritual sense to be so strong. You've detected it a moment earlier than me. I didn't expect for Junior Martial Brother to be so careful as to release his spiritual sense while so near soaring Heaven City." Han Li silently smiled in response. In truth, given his powerful spiritual sense, it hadn't taken him any effort to sense them. However, the nascent soul cultivator approaching them from afar did seem to possess powerful spiritual sense as well. Han Li and Elder Lu were curious about who was approaching them and unconsciously slowed down. A short moment later, a drum beat could be heard from the distance and golden light shined from the horizon. A group of golden-clothed and armored cultivators with the appearance of heavenly warriors were closely escorting a carriage of dazzling and magnificent design. There were also white cranes flying in front of it, followed by palace maids carrying cauldrons. It appeared as if a monarch was making a tour in an imposing manner. Mu Peiling was dumbfounded at the sight, and her jaw dropped in astonishment. Han Li was also amazed by the sight, but he soon regained his calm. He was aware that cultivators were odd and fantastical to every description, particularly cultivators at the nascent soul stage. Perhaps due to the influence of their cultivation's arts or otherwise, their temperaments become strange and separated from reason. Since this was a common affair, he was surprised for only a moment. But when the middle-aged man saw this, he felt his blood turn cold and he harshly whispered, "Duke Nanlong, why is this old eccentric also participating in the trade meet? Junior Martial Brother Han, do not speak carelessly. His abilities are mighty and his temperament is strange. Since I've met him in the past, let me deal with him." With those hasty words, the middle-aged man called for Han Li to stop alongside him. He wore a serious expression as he respectfully waited for the group of cultivators to approach. Han Li's expression stirred from seeing the middle-aged man appear so nervous. He complied with his warnings, and Mu Peiling tactfully kept silent as well. A short moment later, the golden-armored cultivator soldiers in the carriage drew closer. Upon closer look, Han Li felt his heart tremble. The halberd-wielding soldier cultivators weren't much to behold. While their appearances were formidable and lofty, their cultivations were only at foundation establishment stage. Rather, what made Han Li's heart tremble were the two spirit beasts pulling the carriage. From the azure scale armor and the bizarre horn on its head, one of the beasts appeared to be a mythical Killin. The other beast had fluttering wings of fire with long, golden feathers. It was actually a fire phoenix. As Han Li grew fearful of the two spirit beasts, the carriage drew closer to them. Before the carriage approached, Elder Lu saluted in its direction and spoke with a clear voice. "Is that Marquis Nanlong? I am the Drifting Cloud Sect's Lu Luo. It has been 300 years since I've last seen you in the company of my master, Monk Mu Li. It is truly my fortune to meet you again." Although Elder Lu's words were neutral in tone, Han Li could clearly hear a trace of fear in his voice, and noted that he seemed to refer to himself as a junior. The huge carriage was obscured from sight by a barrier of golden mist. However, when Elder Lu called out to the carriage in greeting, the drumbeats came to a sudden stop. The group of cultivators stopped about 100 meters away from Han Li and company as silence descended. Han Li's eyes narrowed upon seeing this, but his expression soon returned to normal. A lazy tone came from within the golden light. "Oh, so you're Mu Li's pedantic scholarly disciple. At the time you seemed to only be a core formation cultivator. I didn't think in a mere 300 years you've also reached nascent soul stage. I've heard your master had passed away in meditation during that time. It is truly a pity. However, the fellow Taoist at your side seems quite unfamiliar." When Han Li heard himself mentioned, he simply smiled and remained silent. He was certain that his senior martial brother Lu would answer on his behalf. Sure enough, the middle-aged man rushed to introduce Han Li before Marquis Nanlong could speak any further. "Marquis, this is my junior martial brother Han. He has just recently condensed a nascent soul and joined our sect. At his side is Lady Mu, his concubine. Junior martial brother Han, this is Marquis Nanlong, an old friend of my deceased master. I hope you will acquaint yourself with him." As his clothes fluttered in the wind, Han Li calmly saluted the carriage. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Marquis Nanlong." Within the carriage, Marquis Nanlong indifferently said, "Han Li. That name is completely unfamiliar. It seems fellow Taoist Han is truly a new nascent soul cultivator. Might we have an exchange of skill to gauge your abilities?" "Ah, Junior Martial Brother Han only condensed a nascent soul a few years ago. How could he possibly be a match for fellow Taoist Nanlong? I mean, fellow Taoist Nanlong is already a mid-nascent soul cultivator." Lu Luo's smiling expression froze, and he inwardly cursed. Although this old eccentric's temperament was peculiar, his words suggested he was now entirely different from before. "Be at ease. I won't be using my cultivation to take advantage of the weak. We will only be using our spiritual sense to contest. After all, fellow Taoist Han's spiritual sense is rather strong, very unlike a cultivator who had just condensed his nascent soul. I am anxious to display my own skill." As soon as that was said, a golden light flashed from the huge carriage, fading away to reveal the three that were sitting inside. One was a man wearing robes embroidered with purple pythons, and a tall, jade-green hat with a long beard that reached down to his chest. The other two were women dressed in snow-white palace robes. Each beauty was being loosely held in his embrace on each side. The women at the marquis sides were certain to be his concubines. Although their cultivations were only at foundation establishment, their graceful beauty was a sight to behold. Worry filled Lu Luo, and he directly said, "Marquis must be joking. Although Junior Martial Brother Han's spiritual sense is a bit strong, contests of spiritual sense are exceedingly dangerous. How can this be taken so lightly?" Marquis Nanlong chuckled with a cold smile and calmly said, "Fellow Taoist Lu, you seem worried, but perhaps fellow Taoist Han would be willing to give it a chance." He glanced at Han Li as a cold glint flickering through his eyes. "Moreover, if I remember correctly, we are already within 500 kilometers of soaring Heaven City. If fellow Taoist Han truly refuses my good intentions, I will make use of the forced trade law." Lu Luo's expression changed as he faintly felt a sense of foreboding. "Forced trade? What does the Marquis mean?" Marquis Nanlong's gaze coldly swept over Mu Paling as he expressionlessly said, "From how intimately Lady Mu and fellow Taoist Han are acting, fellow Taoist Han must certainly hold her dear. It just so happens that I have two beloved concubines at my side, but I've grown bored of them. I'll use them to exchange for fellow Taoist Han's concubine. My two beloved concubines are on par with Lady Mu with regards to both cultivation and appearance, fulfilling the forced trade conditions. If fellow Taoist Han is unwilling to trade, you will have to stake it in a contest of spiritual sense. If you win, not only will you retain your own concubine, but you may take both of mine." The two concubines in his embrace had a slight change of expression, but they soon returned to normal. When Lu Luo heard this, furious alarm was revealed on his face, and he was at a loss for words while Mu Paling turned pale. Han Li frowned for a moment before he calmly responded, "A forced trade. Senior Martial Brother Lu, could you give me a detailed explanation?" From Han Li's perspective, this Marquis Nanlong was still a mere mid-nascent soul cultivator and was nothing to fear with Han Li's current abilities. "It isn't anything much. Forced trades are one of the laws that are specifically for use by nascent soul cultivators of the host power. Junior Martial Brother should know that when cultivators reach nascent soul stage, no powers are willing to offend one another. The host of the trade meet is no exception to this. However, with such a large trade meet, there are certain to be a few clashes and disagreements. If the cultivators are at the core formation stage or below, the hosting power may forcefully suppress them. But if something were to occur between nascent soul cultivators, the hosting power is unwilling to go through the trouble of intervening. As such, there are a set of particular laws that will allow for nascent soul cultivators to resolve the dispute themselves. Forced trades are among the least used of these laws. Specifically, before the trade meet starts, any nascent soul cultivators within 500 kilometers of the city may use obviously superior goods to trade for something they require. If the other party refuses, both sides may settle the decision by comparing techniques and divine abilities. However, the conditions for use are harsh. Even if the initiator of the exchange wins, they still must pay the price to exchange. But if they lose, they will hand over their proposed goods to the challenged party free of charge. Furthermore, if someone is severely injured during the challenge, the trade meet host will pursue the offending party to its greatest extent, but it had always been extremely difficult to constrain nascent soul cultivators. Also, unless the item is desperately required, and one's cultivation is clearly higher than the challenged party, no one would perform such a risky trade and risk making enemies. Lu Luo's expression was unsightly as he gave Han Li the explanation. With regards to concubines, there have been nascent soul cultivators that trade them, and it is actually quite popular among a few devil Dao sects. As the conditions of the current exchange were satisfactory, contacting the Nine Nations Union's enforcers would result in nothing. Fortunately, this affair shouldn't put Han Li's life at risk, but it would be rather troublesome if he were to receive injuries before the trade meet even started. Moreover, Han Li wasn't particularly attached to Mu Paling. Even if he was forced to trade her, he would end up with two grand beauties. It shouldn't prove to be too much of a loss for him. Han Li's expression was completely calm upon hearing Lu Luo's explanation, but Mu Paling was full of regret. Had she known that the trade meet had such laws, she wouldn't have requested to accompany Han Li. Although she didn't know much of this Marquis Nanlong, from how he treated other cultivators and his concubines, it was likely that she wouldn't be able to preserve her maidenhood until core formation stage and would be treated like a material good. Mu Paling gritted her teeth at the thought of this occurring, and her pale complexion faintly revealed a dark shade of red. She didn't have high hopes that her husband would be able to defeat him. Marquis Nanlong sat on the carriage and closely pressured Han Li, asking, "Well, will fellow Taoist agree to the exchange, or will we have a match with our spiritual sense?" Silence filled their surroundings for a time. Not only did Lu Luo and Mu Paling nervously glance at Han Li, but even the two concubines of Marquis Nanlong curiously glanced at the youthful cultivator with an ordinary appearance. After stroking his chin, Han Li suddenly smiled. "If it's a contest of spiritual sense, then I will agree. Since I've just recently condensed my nascent soul, I coincidentally wish to compare my spiritual sense against other nascent soul cultivators. However, if I somehow manage to win, I don't want the Marquis's beloved concubines. Instead, I would rather know the true reason Marquis Nanlong has decided to have a spiritual sense competition. I hope the Marquis won't merely say that I was displeasing to the eye or that he finds my own concubine to be desirable." Han Li calmly spoke, revealing not a trace of worry. An indescribable expression flickered over the Marquis' face, and the others were left at a complete loss. Marquis Nanlong grew silent for a moment before slowly replying, "All right, I agree." His expression appeared completely solemn. "My lord," Mu Paling couldn't help but call out to Han Li upon seeing him agree to the battle. She wore a complicated expression on her face. Han Li waved his arm. "It's nothing, just a mere contest." Lu Luo sighed and warned, "Junior Marshal brother, be careful. If it becomes too much, concede immediately. I will immediately act to protect you." Han Li nodded and said nothing further. At that moment, Marquis Nanlong had already pushed away his concubines and flung his sleeve, launching himself through the air. Azure light flashed from Han Li's body as he also made his approach. Although the forced trade provision mentioned that it would be best if the Nine Nations Union enforcers to be present, both sides decided to tacitly remain silent of the matter. When both parties were only about 20 meters away from another, they stopped. Han Li then calmly said, "Although I don't know why the Marquis truly wishes to test the depths of my spiritual sense, the reason clearly isn't shallow. I'm quite curious about the matter. Fellow Taoist Han is truly intelligent. However, you will only know the reason if your spiritual sense is at least as strong as mine. Were it not for your powerful spiritual sense sweeping past me previously, I wouldn't have tainted my reputation by challenging you." Marquis Nanlong coldly smiled and bluntly said, "However, I don't see your chance of victory being large. The differences in spiritual strength between early and mid-nascent soul cultivators aren't something to underestimate. Fellow Taoist speaks the truth, but I have no intention of handing over my concubine. I merely wish to exchange a few pointers." Han Li spoke calmly and soon released his spiritual sense. With the appearance of an astonishing aura, something shot towards the Marquis. "Good." Marquis Nanlong appeared completely calm and released his spiritual sense. Two streaks of nearly incorporeal force appeared between the two and burst in a collision. A violent gust suddenly appeared and blew out in every direction. Marquis Nanlong felt alarmed by the development as his initial spiritual sense probe instantly grew several times greater in size. Layers and streams of violent white instantly flew into the gap of space between Han Li and the Marquis, causing their silhouettes to blur as if there were two originless and unmoving shadows. Spiritual sense formation. How can this be? How is Junior Marshal brother Han's spiritual sense so strong? Lu Luo couldn't help but cry out in disbelief. Spiritual sense formation. Could my lord win? I'm not sure either, but ordinarily, spiritual sense formation is a divine ability only mid-nascent soul cultivators can grasp. For junior martial brother Han to be able to use this technique, his main cultivation art must be specialized in spiritual sense. That is the only possible explanation. Lu Luo's excited words turned into a pensive mutter halfway through. Filled with hope by her martial ancestor Lu's explanation, Mu Paling said, "In that case, my lord must have a fighting chance." With a shifting expression, Lu Luo said, "That's hard to say. There are differences in strength among even similar grade cultivators. Marquis Nanlong had already entered the mid-nascent soul stage 300 years ago. Although his progress has stalled, he is without a doubt only a step away from late-nascent soul stage. It should be quite difficult for junior martial brother Han to win against this old eccentric." When Mu Paling heard this, her briefly hopeful heart immediately turned ice cold once again. At that moment, the explosions in the skies suddenly became far more dense and winds began to continuously revolve, forming a huge ring of white wind around Han Li and the Marquis. Lu Luo yelped in surprise as an odd expression appeared on his face. "I can't believe it. Junior martial brother isn't losing." Mu Paling was overjoyed by this and thought to ask something more, but a series of blinding white lights filled the skies. Soon after, claps of thunder rang out and the ring of wind surrounding them ruptured, sweeping up their surroundings in a violent windstorm. 100 meters away from them, the others revealed shock as they saw the overbearing squalls arrive towards them. "Not good," Lu Luo softly shouted. His figure blurred and blocked Mu Paling. At the same time he crossed his hands, summoning a blue light barrier in front of them. In that short moment, the fierce squall had already arrived at their barrier. Strange creaks continuously sounded out from the wind as if it were a heavy strike. An instant later, there was a deep indentation left behind on the barrier. Fortunately, the winds quickly scattered, and a majority swept past them. The light barrier was soon restored to its original form. As for Marquis Nanlong's group of soldier cultivators, they lifted their golden halberds in a disciplined manner, forming a huge barrier of golden light around them and the carriage. However, the golden light only lasted against the white gale for an instant before shattering. When the remaining gusts swept through, the cultivators behind the barrier held their heads in their arms and mysteriously screamed. Blood bled from every opening of their head in a frightening display. Only the two concubines were safe due to the carriage's protective restrictions. However, their faces were pale from fear. Mu Paling felt her blood turn cold at the sight as she turned her gaze once more to Han Li, mesmerized. At that moment, Marquis Nanlong coldly snorted. A ball of golden light suddenly appeared and burst into countless streaks of golden light that quickly surrounded his servants. When the golden light appeared, his servants ceased their screams and stood firm once more. Although they appeared panic-stricken, they no longer seemed to be in pain. Having saved his subordinates, Marquis Nanlong turned his gaze towards Han Li and revealed bewilderment, as if he couldn't believe that Han Li's spiritual sense could rival his own. In that previous bout, he had released a majority of his spiritual sense, but Han Li was able to effortlessly continue. From how relaxed he appeared, it seemed possible that Han Li's spiritual sense was actually stronger than his own. Marquis Nanlong's contempt had long disappeared, and his heart wavered. At that moment, Han Li widely smiled at him and casually said, "Shall we stop the contest? I fear I might not last if this continues." With some further thought, Marquis Nanlong's expression relaxed and he said, "Ha, fellow Taoist Han is far too modest. Let alone your techniques, but even your spiritual sense isn't inferior to my own in the slightest. Let us drop the contest, else we may end up injured." When Han Li heard this, he inwardly sighed despite the smile on his face. Although he wasn't willing to truly fight against this Marquis Nanlong, from what he had experienced in the contest, Han Li should prove an equal match at the very least. However, their recent struggle had caused the Marquis to view Han Li with some apprehension, and he didn't dare to treat him lightly. Moreover, his spiritual sense was strong enough to meet his conditions. He had a request to make of Han Li. Marquis South Dragon strangely smiled at Han Li and stealthily sent him a voice transmission. "Since fellow Taoist Han's spiritual sense is on par with mine, I will tell you the true reason for the contest. It is as fellow Taoist guest. I had a different objective in mind for forcibly testing your spiritual sense. However, this matter is quite important, and it is inconvenient to speak of it here. The Jade slip contains a map. On the 4th day of the trade meet, there will be a gathering of cultivators as indicated. I will introduce you to these fellow Taoists, and we will discuss a matter that will benefit us all." Afterwards, he stroked his storage pouch and took out an exquisite jade slip that he tossed towards Han Li without any regard to Lu Luo. When Han Li saw this, he immediately extended his hand and took the jade slip. After examining the marquis for a moment, he placed the jade slip into his storage pouch for later. The marquis chuckled at the sight and then descended towards his carriage in a sphere of golden light. The carriage's golden light then appeared once more, and he quickly made his way towards Soaring Heaven City with his escort. The marquis seemed to ignore Lu Luo in his departure. While other nascent soul cultivators would feel indignant and dissatisfied by this treatment, Lu Luo knew of the marquis' eccentric personality and could only smile wryly. At that moment, Han Li descended towards Elder Lu and Mu Paling. "My lord, are you all right?" When she saw Han Li return, Mu Paling greeted him with a flushed face as she stared at him with bright eyes. Although her lord had contested with Marquis Nanlong for only a moment, that recent display of mighty ability had greatly shaken her heart. She felt somewhat more appreciative of her position by his side and faintly developed a sense of security from him. "It was nothing, merely a bit of effort," Han Li calmly said. Her sudden display of concern had made his heart throb. Lu Luo looked at Han Li for a long while with admiration before beaming and said, "Junior Marshal Brother, you keep your secrets well. You made me worry for nothing." Han Li calmly said, "I never meant to conceal this from my two senior martial brothers. It's just that you haven't ever asked me about it, but let's hurry for now. Those spiritual sense gales will certainly draw the attention of many cultivators." Lu Luo instantly agreed. "That's right, it would be troublesome if this were widely spread. Let's quickly head to Soaring Skies City." Han Li stood on the side of a mountain and glanced at the huge city walls several kilometers away. He softly said, "This is Soaring Heaven's mountain." Lu Luo stood at Han Li's side and spoke with a similar expression. "Has Junior Marshal Brother never seen such a large city before? The Nine Nations Union have expanded this city several times before reaching such a size. Although I wouldn't dare to say that this is the largest city in the Heavenly South, it definitely is among the top 5. The entire city is also made of huge stones from the same source." When Han Li heard this, he faintly smiled. What city could possibly best Scattered Star Seas? Heavenly Star City. Now that city was truly gargantuan existence. Although Soaring Heaven City was a huge city that spanned over 50 kilometers, it still wasn't something that could be compared to Heavenly Star City. Han Li didn't care much of it, but Mu Paling was clearly amazed by the sight of this stone city. "Nevertheless, we will have to approach Soaring Heaven City on foot. How troublesome." Lu Luo shook his hand and spoke with slight dissatisfaction. Han Li pursed his lips and replied, "The Nine Nations Union can't help it. There are far too many high-grade cultivators that have come. They would have no way of managing the city if they were to come by air. Fortunately, these restrictions are merely superficial against nascent soul cultivators like us. If we truly wished to fly, these restrictions couldn't do anything to us." I didn't expect for Junior Marshal Brother to be so open-minded. "All right, let's go. The sooner we get to the city, the more profit will be had." Ever since Han Li's bout with Marquis Nanlong, Senior Marshal Brother Lu had treated Han Li in a far greater familiarity. Han Li nodded with a smile, and the three began to walk towards the city gate in stride. Because they were in the vicinity of Soaring Heaven City, there were vast crowds entering the city from every direction. Han Li and Lu Luo already concealed their cultivation, as this didn't wish to cause a disturbance. They entered the crowd under the guise of Foundation Establishment cultivators and made way towards the city gate. Although there were protectors from the Nine Nations Union, they didn't discover anything amiss from Han Li or Lu Luo. After they entered Soaring Heaven City, they spotted orderly rows of stone buildings. There were stone streets of varying length between each of the stone buildings, forming what seemed to be a crowded web-like pathway. Since Lu Luo had been at Soaring Heavens in the past, he suggested, "Let's first get a fixed residence. There is no need for us to barge into any inns. There are distinguished pavilions that are specialized for nascent soul cultivators like us. We'll be heading there directly." And Li didn't raise any objects, and followed after Elder Lu with Mu Paling in tow. Lu Luo ended up bringing to the two towards a corner of the city. A short moment later, the three passed through many roads before arriving in front of a white light barrier. Behind the light barrier laid many pavilions that were simply designed but elegant nonetheless. There were other cultivators outside the light barrier, peering inside with expressions of admiration and reverence. However, they didn't dare to stay for too long, and each of them eventually hurried on their way. The restrictions here are only something a nascent soul cultivator can dissolve. Lu Luo pressed his hand against the light barrier, and blue light flickered from his palm. With a whoosh, the white light barrier formed a hole from where Lu Luo's palm had touched it. He then flew inside with a blur, followed by the light barrier closing at an inconceivable speed. After a moment of surprise, Han Li opened his mouth and spouted out a mist of azure light. The white light barrier flickered upon contact with the azure light, and a 3-meter large hole immediately shattered. Han Li grabbed onto Mu Paling's waist and quickly brought her through the light barrier. Mu Paling blushed from being in Han Li's embrace and felt a peculiar emotion in her heart. Lu Luo appeared amazed at how easily Han Li had broken through the barrier, but his calm soon returned. Lu Luo pointed to a few of the pavilions with a smile and said, "These pavilions are for the use for any nascent soul cultivators and any disciples they may bring. They may be chosen at will, but the light restrictions surrounding the pavilions illustrate whether or not they are already occupied. However, not all nascent soul cultivators are willing to use this place. There are a few eccentrics that are willing to stay outside the city or at inns." As expected, a small portion of the pavilions were already glowing with light restrictions. Lu Luo pointed to 2 pavilions a couple hundred of meters away and proposed, "Junior Marshal Brother, let's pick those neighboring pavilions. If anything happens, it will be best if we look after each other." After examining them for a moment, Han Li replied, "Let's do as you say." Just as Lu Luo was about to say something else, the white-yellow light barrier covering another pavilion suddenly opened to reveal a small figure. When this person swept past Han Li and Luo Lu, they astonishedly said, "Yi, is it not Brother Lu? I didn't expect for you to arrive so early." Han Li hastily peered in the speaker's direction. This person was a child with delicate, flawless skin. He was the child fire dragon that Han Li previously saw at the sacred area of the 3 sects. Once he finished speaking, his bright eyes turned towards Han Li and Mu Paling, resulting in an expression of astonishment. With his vast memory, he was able to recall them both being among the finalists of the last sword trial assembly. However, Han Li was now only using a superficial cultivation concealment technique, something ineffective against cultivators of the same grade. After a moment of surprise, the boy revealed an expression of understanding. Lu Luo quickly smiled upon seeing him. It seemed their relationship was quite good. "He. So it turned out to be fellow Taoist Lan. How are we early? You obviously rushed over here." "Ah, that's right, this is our newly joined Elder Han. Junior Marshal Brother Han, I believe you've met Brother Lan once before. There should be no further need for introductions." When the child fire dragon heard this, he wryly smiled and said, "So it is true that fellow Taoist Han entered the Drifting Cloud sect as a new elder. My eyes were truly awry that day." Having heard this, Han Li offered a cursory explanation with a smile. "I had merely heard of the grand reputation of the sacred spirit well tree and wished to enter the sacred area to take a look. I sincerely hope fellow Taoist Lan didn't take offense. Since fellow Taoist is now an elder of the Drifting Cloud sect, this matter need not be mentioned further. However, you two have arrived quite timely. I happen to be meeting a few friendly acquaintances of mine at the Crystal Dragon Pavilion for a small-scale trade. How about you two fellow Taoists come and take a look? Perhaps you might find something you like." The child fire dragon seemed to have a straightforward temperament to have invited them with a beckon. Lu Luo joyously said, "To think there would be an exchange so soon. We've definitely come at a good time." He then hastily turned towards Han Li with his expression quickly turning solemn. "Junior Marshal Brother Han, there aren't many exchanges that occur between nascent soul cultivators. We must go, else we could miss some good items." Han Li calmly smiled and said, "Then let us follow Senior Marshal Brother Lan." After Han Li and Luo Lu arranged restrictions outside their pavilions, they followed the child fire dragon out of the residential area. Han Li had instructed Mu Paling to stay inside the pavilion for the time being. The child fire dragon explained in a clear voice, "The Crystal Dragon Pavilion was opened by a good friend of mine from the 9 Nations Union. My good friend has made a wide range of connections, acquainting himself with those from every power. As such, he was able to form this trade meeting. However, in order to prevent any unnecessary trouble, all of those attending will be concealing their true appearances." Lu Luo's heart stirred and he spoke with amazement. "Brother Lan seems to be talking of Taoist Heaven Crystal. However, I recall that Taoist Heaven Crystal isn't fond of business matters. Did he truly take the initiative to hold this trade meeting?" The child fire dragon chuckled and said, "He. I didn't expect that fellow Taoist Lu would know of my old friend's reputation. That's right, While my old friend isn't fond of such inconvenience, there are a few required materials that he had been searching for. I reckon he took the initiative to start this trade meet in order to find them. Luluo nodded his head. Oh, if that's the case, it does seem quite likely. As Han Li listened to the two, his expression remained as always. The three walked towards a pure white pavilion ahead of them. It was 3 stories tall and grew more narrow towards the top. There was a silver sign that hung from the building with the words Crystal Dragon Pavilion. It's right here, fellow Taoists, let's go in. The child fire dragon smiled at the two and walked towards the Crystal Dragon Pavilion with a swagger. Once they approached the pavilion's large gate, Han Li casually took a look inside and revealed surprise. The interior appeared to be that of an ordinary restaurant. Not only was it full of guests that were eating and drinking, there were also several waiters that were scurrying between tables with dishes in hand. The scents of fine wine and food were accompanied with the clanging of cups. After they pushed open the gates, they saw a foot-long wooden plate hung at the side. "This building is taken. Outsiders are prohibited," were written on it in pitch-black words. That old ghost heaven crystal is still playing around with silly illusion techniques. Really? After muttering those words, the child fire dragon paid no more attention to it and walked in with a stride. When Han Li heard this, his heart stirred and he swept his spiritual sense past the floor. He soon revealed a strange expression, but he continued inside. Once they passed the gate, the guests, waiters, scents and sounds all disappeared like the pop of a bubble. Han Li casually swept his gaze at the scene and saw that all that remained was a gray mist surrounding the building. There was merely an old-fashioned table at the center of the room with a copper lamp that was lit with a gray-robed Taoist with an amiable face sitting behind the lamp. He appeared to be 60 years of age and was glancing at the three with a smile. "I didn't expect that Brother Lan would arrive, let alone bring guests. This old Taoist's eyes are rather poor. It seems as if I've never seen this azure-robed fellow Taoist before. Could he have recently entered nascent soul?" The gray-robed Taoist smiled and cordially beckoned to them. His intimate manners unconsciously aroused in a good impression amongst them. The child fire dragon returned the smile, but he spoke with an unexpectedly harsh tone. "Brother Heaven Crystal, I've brought 2 uninvited guests. Surely you won't refuse them." "Why would I do that? This place welcomes all fellow Taoists. Besides, I'm acquainted with fellow Taoist Lu. It is only—" The old Taoist's gaze hovered towards Han Li. Han Li took a step forward and saluted him. "I am the Drifting Cloud Sect's Han Li, a newly ascended nascent soul cultivator. I hope Taoist Heaven Crystal can provide me some guidance in the future." Taoist Heaven Crystal pleasantly smiled and said, "So it turned out to be a sect member of fellow Taoist Lu. From his young age, he's certain to have boundless prospects." "Enough, old friend. The others should be arriving soon. We'll be going upstairs." From his direct words, it seemed the child fire dragon had a rather deep friendship with him. Taoist Heaven Crystal sighed. "Brother Lan is still so impatient. Almost everyone has already arrived. I'm sure a few of the more impatient ones have already started trading as well. Here are 2 black spirit masks for those fellow Taoists. Brother Lan, do you need one?" He then flipped his hands and summoned 2 black wood masks into his hands with a flash of white light. Talisman characters appeared on their surface. The child fire dragon's cheeks bulged as if he were annoyed. He snorted and said, "Of course you should know that with my stature, regardless of any illusions I use, I cannot conceal myself. Of course, please come up. This old man will join you in a bit." Taoist Heaven Crystal casually smiled and tossed the masks to Han Li and Lu Luo. At that same time, a white streak of light showed towards the mist behind him. The mist disappeared and revealed stairs of glittering light that led to the 2nd floor. Without any further courtesies, the child fire dragon wordlessly walked around the table and climbed to the 2nd floor. Lu Luo and Han Li saluted the old Taoist before following him up the stairs. Once Han Li discovered that his mask was exactly the same as Lu Luo's, he wore it without any reservations and climbed up the stairs. The mask was cold to the touch and soft. To Han Li's surprise, it was so comfortable, it felt as if it wasn't even there. He turned his head to look at Lu Luo and saw that he also wore the mask, turning his face into an icy wooden carving. Han Li faintly smiled at the sight. At that moment, the three had already arrived on the 2nd floor. It was well lit with over 100 fist-sized moonstones embedded in the ceiling and walls. But what surprised Han Li most of all was that the 2nd floor was several times more spacious than the 1st floor. It appeared far narrower than the 1st floor from the outside. Of course, the 2nd floor wasn't empty. There were tables lined up against the walls with chairs accompanying each of them. There were various clothed cultivators sitting in many of them. From their bodies and hair, it appeared there were men and women of all ages. When Han Li and company arrived, countless cold glints swept past them. Many of them clearly recognized the unconcealed child fire dragon. The expressions of their eyes varied anywhere from goodwill, hatred, and indifferences. There were a few gazes that even carried unconcealable killing intent, suggesting they formed animosity in the past. The child fire dragon was unconcerned with these gazes and led Han Li and Luo Lu to an empty table. At that moment, Han Li glanced at the others. Because of the mask's concealment, those with formidable spiritual sense such as Han Li were unable to clearly see their faces. However, there was no doubt that each of them were nascent soul cultivators from their spiritual chi fluctuations. There were even two among them that were at mid-nascent soul stage, but they were sitting alone, and none dared to rashly sit next to them. What appeared to be a small pavilion held at least 20 nascent soul cultivators, something that was rarely heard of. Before this, Han Li hadn't seen so many nascent soul eccentrics in one place. It seemed one's cultivation had to be at a similar level to encounter so many cultivators. Han Li's gaze flickered, and it suddenly focused at a particular corner of the floor. As Taoist Heaven Crystal had mentioned, there were already a few impatient cultivators that had gathered around a table. Their lips were moving from voice transmission, and they occasionally exchanged jade boxes and small bottles in some small-scale trades. However, most of the other cultivators were sitting with their eyes closed in meditation. They were waiting for everyone to gather before they started trading. It seemed what was being traded prematurely wasn't anything particularly valuable. Also, in what seemed to be an attempt to avoid being recognized, many of the cultivators were completely silent and only spoke to one another through voice transmissions. The second floor of the pavilion had completely maintained its silence in a bizarre and stifling manner. The child fire dragon hadn't bothered to wear a mask, attracting many gazes as a result. Nevertheless, there were none who took the initiative to reveal themselves to him. Sitting right across from Han Li and company was an extremely fat man who also wore no mask. His waist was 4 times thicker than the average person and even caused his chair to slightly deform. Regardless, this person didn't seem to mind in the last. When he saw Han Li glance at him, he shot a beaming smile in his direction. However, the many layers of fat on his face made it difficult to accept his kind intentions. Sitting at the plump man's side was a very shapely female cultivator. Although she wore a mask, her eyes were vivid and captivating. Still, everyone present was certain of the cunning of those around them, and none paid any particular attention to the woman's charm. When Han Li saw this, he heard Lu Luo's voice transmission. "Junior Marshal Brother Han, be careful. That fatty may seem harmless, but together with the woman at his side, they are the Devil Dao Harmonious Bond Sex Flesh Rouge Devils. With their secret pair cultivation techniques, they are able to contend against even mid-nascent soul cultivators. Avoid provoking them, they are incredibly difficult to deal with." When Han Li heard this, he felt his heart tremble, and he immediately added their names onto a long list of those he should be wary of. After he finished observing the characteristics of all others in the room, he closed his eyes and silently meditated. Over the period of a long while, several masked nascent soul cultivators continuously entered the room. Taoist Heaven Crystal was the last to enter, drawing the eyes of all the cultivators present. He directly walked to the center of the floor and casually waved his arm, summoning a table and chair towards him with white light. He then smiled and said, "Everyone should have already arrived. If nobody has anything else to say, let us start the trade meet."